There is something deeply strange about sitting with a show that has been broadcasting since January 1999 and still occupies the same position on your screen with the same characters doing the same things in the same house, on the same street. Family Guy has been around long enough that it has become part of the furniture of popular culture. It is just there, like a piece of furniture that has been in the living room so long you have stopped actually looking at it. You know it is there. You know its shape. You know roughly what to expect from it every time you sit down near it. The familiarity has done the same thing familiarity always does, which is smooth over the strangeness until the strangeness becomes invisible. But the strangeness is there. It was always there. And the people who have spent years watching this show, not just passively, but with the kind of attentive love that long-running television inspires in its most devoted audience, have been cataloging that strangeness and asking the questions that the strangeness raises. Why does nothing in this world change in any lasting way? Why do these characters keep cycling through the same emotional territory without anything genuinely accumulating? Why is the most intelligent character in the household a dog who cannot own property? Why has death, the actual physical personification of mortality, visited this specific family multiple times and developed what can only be described as a fondness for them? Why does a 1-year-old baby have access to weapons technology that would make major world governments weep with envy? Why does the entire social structure of this fictional Rhode Island town seem to have organized itself, collectively and apparently spontaneously, around making one specific teenager as miserable as possible? These questions do not have comfortable answers inside the show's own comedy framework, but they have answers outside of it. The answers that the most dedicated part of this show's audience has constructed, across years of watching and thinking and arguing online, and rewatching with new frameworks in mind, are the theories this video is about. They are not all the same kind of disturbing. Some of them are disturbing in the way of something genuinely dark and unsettling. Some of them are disturbing in the way of something deeply sad. Some of them are disturbing in the way of something that, once you hear it, you cannot unhear, and every subsequent episode of the show becomes a slightly different experience than it was before you knew what the theory was saying. All of them, taken together, form a picture that is not a comedy. The show has run for over 25 years. It has aired more than 400 episodes. It has been renewed through 2029 under a deal with Disney. It will almost certainly hit its 30th anniversary on the air. And in that entire span, across all of those episodes and all of those seasons, certain things about it have never changed. The house on Spooner Street always looks the same. The family is always the same family. Whatever happened last week left no mark on this week. The status quo reasserts itself with the reliability of a heartbeat. Why? Why is a show that has been running this long, that has produced this many hours of television, that has had this many different writers and showrunners and creative influences pass through it, still showing you something that looks almost exactly like the first episode? The fan theories gathered here are the most interesting answers anyone has produced to that question. And the most interesting of those answers, the ones that reach the furthest and explain the most, tend to arrive at the same conclusion. Something is holding these people in place. Something is maintaining this situation. Something does not want Spooner Street to change, and whatever that something is, it has been winning for 25 years. Let us find out what it is. After the first section, I want you to drop a comment right now and tell me where you are in the world and what time it is where you are watching. I genuinely love knowing who is out there when these go live. And if you are enjoying this and you want to be here for the next one, the subscribe button is free and it genuinely matters for what we can put together for you. Section 1. The Architecture of Unease. What makes this show different from every other cartoon? Most long-running animated comedies generate some degree of fan theorizing. The Simpsons has theories, Futurama has theories. Bob's Burgers, South Park, King of the Hill, all of them have produced interpretive communities that look at the shows closely enough to find things that are not immediately visible on the surface. But the theorizing that surrounds Family Guy is different in character from what most of these other shows generate. It is darker, more structurally ambitious, more emotionally invested, and more persistent across time. Family Guy theories do not just add to the show's mythology, they tend to replace the show's surface with something else entirely, to offer frameworks that, if accepted, make the comedy into something that is not comedy at all. Understanding why Family Guy generates this specific kind of theorizing requires understanding what is unusual about the show's construction. What qualities it has that other long-running animated comedies do not share in the same combination. Because the theories do not arise from nowhere, they arise from specific features of the show's reality, specific gaps and inconsistencies, and moments of unexpected honesty that invite exactly the kind of questioning that produces them. The first of these features is the radical instability of the show's fictional world. Family Guy has, from its earliest episodes, operated in a mode of reality that it never committed to explaining or stabilizing. Other long-running animated comedies tend to establish clear rules for their world, even if those rules involve accepting things like a talking yellow family or a futuristic society, and then they tend to operate within those rules with reasonable consistency. The rules themselves may be strange, but they are consistent, and consistency creates the sense of a stable world that the viewer can orient themselves within. Family Guy does not do this. Family Guy's world bends. It warps. It allows things to happen that should be impossible, and then never accounts for how those things fit into the rest of the reality it has established. Stewie builds a time machine in Season 1. The time machine works, he uses it, other characters interact with its effects, and the show treats it as real within its fiction. This should raise enormous questions about the nature of causality and history and consequence within the show's world. It raises none of them, or rather, the show raises them exactly once in specific episodes, and then returns to behaving as if they were never raised. The time machine exists and works, and the show also behaves as if the normal rules of consequence and permanence apply. Both of these things cannot be simultaneously true unless there is something else going on. The theories are the something else. Stewie's weapons pose a similar challenge. He builds laser guns, mind control devices, teleportation apparatus, carbonite freeze rays, and various other forms of technology that function demonstrably within the show's fiction. These are not toys. They are not fantasies. They produce real effects. Brian has traveled through time using Stewie's equipment. The family has been subject to the effects of Stewie's mind control experiments. And yet the show also treats Stewie as a baby, subject to the limitations that babiness imposes, dependent on others for basic physical care, unable to drive or own property or be taken seriously in the world beyond the household. The gap between what Stewie can build and what Stewie is not supposed to be capable of is vast and permanent, and the show never closes it. It just keeps widening the gap, season by season, episode by episode, until the gap is so enormous that it becomes one of the show's defining features rather than a minor inconsistency. And an enormous gap is an invitation. It invites the viewer to fill it with an explanation. The second feature is the show's habit of breaking its own emotional frame with moments of unexpected and uncomfortable honesty. This is the feature that tends to produce the darkest theories, because it is the one that most directly challenges the viewer's ability to maintain the comedy framework through which the show asks them to experience everything else. The episode Brian and Stewie from Season 8 is the clearest and most often cited example. The episode has no cutaway gags. It has no conventional comedy beats. It is simply two characters trapped in a space together and forced to have a real conversation, and the conversation goes to places that the show's comedy framework cannot contain. Brian reveals that he keeps a gun in a safety deposit box at that bank because there are times when the weight of his existence becomes more than he can easily manage, and he keeps the gun as an exit option. This is treated seriously. The show does not pivot away from it. It holds the weight of the revelation and lets the other character respond to it, and lets the relationship between the two characters become something deeper because of it. Then the episode ends. Then the next episode begins, and Brian is back to his default configuration, and the gun is never mentioned again, and the conversation in the vault is not referenced. The reset comes, as the reset always comes, and whatever the episode revealed about who Brian actually is gets folded back into the ongoing comedy without leaving a visible trace. This pattern of emotional honesty being shown and then sealed off creates a specific cognitive dissonance in viewers who are paying attention. The show showed you something real. The show then pretended it did not show you something real. The show is asking you to hold both of these things simultaneously, to accept both the revelation and its subsequent erasure. And the viewer who cannot quite manage that, who cannot quite let the revelation be erased by the reset, starts asking why. Starts looking for the framework that explains why the honest thing keeps being buried. Starts developing theories. The third feature is the treatment of Meg Griffin, which is the most extended and most systematic of the show's invitations to look beneath the comedy surface. Meg's treatment across the show's run is too comprehensive and too consistent to be processed entirely through a comedy framework. The accumulation of it, across season after season, is not the accumulation of jokes, it is the accumulation of something that functions like a portrait of sustained harm. When you watch enough of it, and when you watch the season 10 moment where Meg finally articulates exactly what has been done to her and then agrees to accept it back again for the sake of everyone else's stability, what you are watching is not a comedy about a family with a punching bag. You are watching something that asks to be taken seriously. And the theories about Meg are the result of viewers who took it seriously and followed where the seriousness led. The fourth feature is structural, and it is perhaps the most important for generating the specific quality of theory that surrounds this show. Family Guy has a reset mechanism that is more thorough and more consistent than any other long-running animated comedy. Things that should permanently change the show do not permanently change it. Characters die and come back. Characters learn lessons and then forget them. Characters reach emotional crisis points and then return, without comment, to their pre-crisis states. The status quo reasserts itself with a completeness that other shows, even the ones that also operate in episodic reset mode, do not quite match. This thoroughgoing erasure of consequence creates, over enough time and enough episodes, a sense that the erasure is not just a narrative convention but something that the world of the show is actively doing. A normal episodic reset is barely noticeable, because it is simply how the form works. Family Guy's reset is noticeable because it keeps erasing things that the show itself has just asked you to care about. It builds towards something and then resets. It builds again, it reaches another point of apparent change, it resets. Over and over, for 25 years. And the reset keeps coming, and the status quo keeps reasserting, and eventually the viewer who is paying close attention starts to ask the question that generates the most important theories. What is maintaining this reset? What is doing the resetting? What is the engine of the eternal Tuesday afternoon of Spooner Street, the force that keeps everything exactly where it is, regardless of what happens in any individual episode? The theories this video covers are the answers to that question. And the reason they tend toward the dark and the disturbing is that comfortable answers do not come. The show's reset is too thorough to be explained by comfortable answers. Something real is behind it, and real explanations for the suppression of consequence in the lives of people who would otherwise be capable of change tend to be disturbing things. Section 2 Purgatory on Spooner Street, the theory that explains everything. Of all the theories that circulate about Family Guy, this is the one that has the most explanatory range. The one that accounts for the most features of the show at once, and does so with the most internal consistency. It is also, depending on which version of it you encounter and how carefully you sit with the implications, the most emotionally devastating interpretation of what the show is doing. Because what it proposes is not just a dark reading of a comedy, it is a reading in which the comedy is a kind of grief, and the characters are souls in the middle of the longest lesson of their lives, and the house on Spooner Street is not a home but a classroom, and no one in it has graduated yet. The theory, which exists in multiple variations and has been developed across fan forums, Reddit threads, and discussion communities for well over a decade, begins with a foundational claim. The Griffin family is dead. They died at some point before the show began, or possibly at the moment the show began, and what we have been watching across more than 25 years of television is not their lives. It is their afterlife. Specifically, it is purgatory. Not hell, which is punishment without end, and not heaven, which was release. Something in between. A place that is organized specifically around the work each soul still needs to do, where the conditions of existence are tailored to each individual's specific failure, and where the duration is entirely determined by whether the soul in question actually does the work. To understand why this reading fits so precisely, you need to look at each of the major characters and consider what their purgatorial sentence is and why it is the specific sentence they are serving. Start with Stewie Griffin. Stewie is 1 year old. He is also, demonstrably and undeniably within the show's fiction, one of the most intelligent beings in existence. His understanding of theoretical physics, advanced engineering, temporal mechanics, strategic planning, and human psychology exceeds that of essentially every adult in the world around him. He has built time machines. He has solved problems that would confound the combined resources of the world's most advanced research institutions. He is, by any cognitive measure, exceptional. And none of this matters. He cannot open a door. He cannot drive to the places he wants to go. He cannot purchase the materials he needs for his projects without someone physically taking him to the store and interpreting his requests to the cashier. He cannot be taken seriously by the world at large because the world at large looks at him and sees a baby, which is what he looks like, which is what his body is, regardless of what his mind has accomplished or is capable of. He is the most powerful intelligence in his environment, locked inside the most physically and socially constrained body his environment contains. His purgatorial sentence, the theory says, is the perfect inversion of what he valued most in life. In whatever life preceded this one, Stewie valued control above everything else. He was someone whose entire self was organized around the acquisition and exercise of power over others and over his environment. He believed that the point of intelligence was dominance. That capability existed to be expressed as control, and so his afterlife gives him the capability and removes the control. He is brilliant and entirely powerless. The very intelligence that was supposed to be his tool for controlling the world around him is now his most prominent quality in an existence where that quality cannot give him anything he wants. He can engineer a time machine and he still cannot get out of his high chair without someone lifting him. The lesson his purgatory is designed to teach him is that control is not the point of intelligence. That real power is not the ability to dominate others, but something else entirely, something closer to what his relationship with Brian, at its best moments, demonstrates. And those best moments are the theory's evidence that Stewie is making progress. The Stewie of the early seasons was entirely organized around schemes and domination and the spectacular exercise of his own capabilities for their own sake. The Stewie of the later seasons is capable of genuine care, of genuine sacrifice, of the kind of love that does not count the cost. When Stewie uses his time machine in the Christmas Guy episode to save Brian's life, when he chooses to act on behalf of someone else's existence rather than his own agenda, that is a soul passing a fragment of its test. It is not permanent. The reset comes, and Stewie is back to his characteristic behaviors. But the capacity for genuine love was revealed, and the purgatorial framework says that what is revealed under pressure is what is actually real, and what is actually real in Stewie is becoming something better than what it was. Lois Griffin's purgatorial sentence is a different kind of inversion. She was, in her real life, a person for whom status was the primary organizing principle of existence. She was born into the Pewter-Schmidt family, which is enormous and powerful and wealthy in ways that shape every aspect of how the world receives you. She had, by virtue of her birth, access to a version of life that most people cannot imagine. The version where financial pressure never constrains your choices, where the social world treats you with deference rather than indifference, where your opinions are heard because you are someone who people want to hear. This was the life she had. It was comfortable. It was privileged. It was, in the way of very comfortable and very privileged lives, perhaps a little empty. She chose to leave it. Or the story of her life says she chose to leave it. She met Peter Griffin working at her family's country club, where he was a pool towel boy, and she chose him, chose the disorder and the humor and the freedom he represented, chose love and chaos over comfort and predictability. This is the romantic version of her story. The purgatorial version asks, what was she really doing? Was she choosing love? Or was she choosing the sensation of choosing something dramatic, the thrill of a choice that would have consequences, the excitement of doing something that would astonish the people who had never imagined a Pewter-Schmidt making that particular decision? Her purgatory strips the comfortable irony out of the choice and makes it real. She is in the modest house with the difficult husband, permanently, without the safety net of the Pewter-Schmidt money and status to return to if things become truly unmanageable. She made the choice and the choice holds. And every time the show puts her within sight of the Pewter-Schmidt world, close enough to feel the comfort of it, something pulls her back to Spooner Street. Her sentence is living in the full reality of the choice she made, rather than the romantic version of it, until she either finds genuine peace with that reality or learns what it was that she was actually looking for when she made it. The moments where Lois is genuinely at peace, genuinely present with her family without the undertone of resentment that colors so many of her interactions, those are her passing fragments of her test. The moments where she retreats back into the coldness, the moments where the management of inconvenient family members reasserts itself over genuine love, those are her sliding back. Brian Griffin's purgatorial assignment is the most publicly humiliating of the set, and it is public in a way that Peter's and Lois's are not, because Brian's humiliation is structural and constant and cannot be avoided even on his best days. Brian considers himself an intellectual. He has read things. He has opinions about literature and philosophy and the state of the cultural conversation. He holds his sophistication as the most important thing about him, the thing that separates him from the people he thinks of as beneath him, the thing that justifies the particular combination of self-regard and disappointment that characterizes his relationship to everything. In his real life, the theory suggests, this sophistication was partly real and partly performance. And the gap between the real version and the performed version was a gap that he worked very hard never to have to look directly at. His purgatory makes the gap impossible to ignore. He is a dog. Everything he says, everything he believes, every claim he makes about his own intelligence and taste comes from the mouth of an animal. He is sitting at a dinner table making arguments about the inadequacy of contemporary literary culture, and everyone at the table is engaged with the argument because he is Brian and they are used to Brian, but outside the specific social bubble of the Griffin household, the picture is a person having a reasoned conversation with his dog. That is what it looks like from the outside. That is what Brian is, from the outside. A dog who has convinced a particular family that it is worth engaging with what he says, in a world that has not extended that engagement to him beyond the immediate social context he inhabits. His purgatory is that the gap he spent his real life refusing to examine is now externally visible in his body. The aspiration and the limitation are simultaneously present and cannot be separated. He is exactly as smart as he thinks he is and exactly as unacknowledged as his most self-aware moments know him to be. The lesson his purgatory is designed to teach him is something about the relationship between genuine intelligence and the need to have that intelligence validated. Something about whether the value of a thought depends on whether anyone with the appropriate credentials acknowledges it. Something about what humility actually requires from a person who is genuinely smart, which is harder than what humility requires from a person who is not. Peter Griffin's purgatory is the one that looks most like a comedy from the outside and is most genuinely agonizing from the inside. Peter is a man who loves his family. This is not in doubt across the early seasons and is at least suggested across the later ones. He wants to be a good husband and a good father. He wants the people he loves to be okay. He wants to be the kind of person who makes things better rather than worse for the people around him. And he is, constitutionally and totally, unable to do any of these things with any consistency. He cannot think carefully enough or consistently enough or accurately enough about consequences to protect the people he loves from the results of his own limitations. He loves them and he damages them, and he cannot stop doing either. The love is real and so is the damage, and he cannot resolve the contradiction between them because resolving it would require a level of sustained self-awareness that his purgatorial condition specifically denies him. He was, in his real life, someone who valued comfort over clarity, who preferred not to think too hard about things, who had a genuine and deep capacity for joy and connection, but who routinely chose the easy path through situations rather than the one that required thought and foresight and the willingness to experience the discomfort of being wrong. His purgatory is that the capacity for thought and foresight has been removed. He has his love and his joy and his fundamental decency stripped of the equipment necessary to act on them effectively. He is trying to be good with the tools of someone who decided not to develop the tools that goodness requires. The lesson is the one that his purgatory makes it impossible to avoid. That love is not sufficient. That caring about people requires the willingness to think carefully about what they actually need, and that the refusal to think carefully is not a neutral act but one with real costs for real people. Chris Griffin's purgatorial assignment is the one that receives the least textual elaboration in the theories, partly because Chris is the least developed of the Griffin children and partly because his backstory, the real-world sin that his afterlife is designed to address, tends to vary more across different versions of the theory than the others. The most common version holds that Chris was, in his real life, someone who used social status as a weapon, a teenager, perhaps, of the kind that every high school contains, who organized others around the exclusion and humiliation of those deemed socially unacceptable. He defined himself by his position in the social hierarchy and defined others by their positions relative to his. He made certain people smaller because making them smaller made him feel bigger, and he never quite developed the ability to look at what he was doing and recognize it for what it was. His purgatory inverts the situation completely. He is now the awkward one, the clueless one. He operates in the world of the family with a persistent bewilderment that is partly funny and partly poignant if you look at it as the experience of someone who cannot quite navigate the social world the way he used to be able to. He is not popular. He is not the one who sets the terms. He is the one who follows, the one who misunderstands references, the one who arrives too late or too early to the moment the situation is in. He is serving the educational curriculum of experiencing from the inside what he inflicted from the outside. And then there is Meg. Meg Griffin's purgatory is the most devastating of all of them, partly because of what it suggests about who she was in her real life, and partly because of what the specific terms of her sentence require from her. The theory, in its most developed form, holds that Meg died by her own hand, that she was a teenager who experienced the specific despair of adolescence with enough intensity and enough isolation that she made a permanent decision in response to what was, though she could not see this from inside it, a temporary condition. She left the world without discovering whether things would have gotten better. She left before she had the chance to find out whether the invisibility and the loneliness and the feeling of being fundamentally unwanted were as permanent as they felt. Her purgatory reconstructs the conditions of her despair as the terms of her continued existence. She is surrounded by the people who were supposed to love her most, in the house that was supposed to be the place of greatest safety, and they treat her as though she barely matters. She is invisible to them. She is unwanted by them, or wanted so inadequately that the wanting does not reach her. The specific feeling she was trying to escape is the permanent texture of her afterlife. But the purgatory is not merely punishment. It is the mechanism of the lesson she needs to learn. She wanted to leave a world where she felt invisible and unloved. Her lesson is how to stay in one, how to choose to remain in exactly the conditions that drove her to leave, and insist, despite everything those conditions say about her worth, that she has worth. How to refuse the role that has been assigned to her. How to stand up and say that what is being done to her is wrong and that she deserves better, and then keep standing after the standing produces no immediate change. The lesson is not that the world will reward her for her persistence. The lesson is that the persistence is itself the point. That choosing to stay and fight for your worth in an environment that denies it, and doing so not once but repeatedly and consistently, is the spiritual achievement that her particular purgatory is designed to produce. Every time Meg stands up for herself, every time she refuses the role, every time she says clearly and specifically what has been done to her and demands better, she is passing a fragment of the test. Every time she retreats back into the accommodating silence, absorbing the abuse to keep the family functional, she is slipping back. The Seahorse Seashell Party episode, in which she delivers her devastating speech and then agrees to take the abuse back, is read by the purgatory theory not as a tragic defeat, but as a soul that is very close to the test, but has not quite arrived at what the test is actually asking. She stood up. She said the true thing. She then prioritized the well-being of others over her own insistence on justice, which is compassionate, genuinely. But the test is not whether she can be compassionate. It is whether she can maintain both, the compassion and the insistence, whether she can love them and still refuse to be diminished by them at the same time. The theory's most quietly hopeful observation is that Meg, across the later seasons, starts to demonstrate exactly this combination. She becomes more capable of self-defense, more willing to hold the line, more able to be present with her family without dissolving into what they need her to be. If purgatory is a course of instruction, she is one of the students who, slowly and non-linearly and imperfectly, is working towards something. The theory leaves open the question of what happens when someone graduates, when a soul has completed the work, when the lesson has been integrated deeply enough that the conditions of the purgatory no longer apply to them in the same way. What does graduation from this specific purgatory look like? Is it that the character leaves the show? Is it that they change in a way that is final and permanent and the reset does not come? Is it something more internal and invisible? A shift that the audience might not be able to see but that is real within the metaphysics of the world? The theories do not agree on this, but they agree on something that is, in its way, genuinely moving, that the show is not just a record of dysfunction, it is a record of souls in process, moving slowly, imperfectly, backward as often as forward, but moving. That underneath the laugh track and the cutaways and the cartoon violence and the recycled character beats, something is actually happening, something is being worked through, and somewhere ahead of all of these people, past the point where the show can currently see, there is a door. And one by one, in whatever order the work gets done, they will be able to walk through it. Section 3. Everything is Peter's dream. The mental institution theory in full. The purgatory theory distributes the cosmic accountability equally. Every member of the family is in their own version of the afterlife, serving their own sentence, learning their own lesson. The mental institution theory is more concentrated than that, and in some ways more immediately harrowing, because it locates the source of everything in a single human mind, and it makes that mind the object of your compassion, rather than the subject of your judgment. The theory says that Family Guy is not a show about a family. It is the internal world of a man sitting alone in a clinical facility somewhere, and the family we have been watching for 25 years is the family he lost, reconstructed from grief and love and broken memory into the specific form his shattered mind can hold them in. The backstory the theory constructs is specific and horrifying in the precise, quiet way that real tragedies are horrifying. The Griffins, in reality, were not quite the Griffins of Spooner Street. Meg was not awkward and unpopular. She was, in reality, exactly the opposite, beautiful and socially capable in the way that some teenagers are, the ones who have figured out the grammar of adolescent social life and can navigate it with grace. And she had a profound bond with her brother Chris, who in reality had a significant intellectual disability resulting from inadequate oxygen at birth. He required more from the world around him than most people do. And Meg gave that more, without resentment, without impatience, without the social calculation that might have led another teenager to distance herself from a sibling who complicated her social life. She chose him. She protected him. She was his advocate and his companion in a world that was not always generous with either. The night that broke everything began as a party. Meg was there, and she drank more than was wise. And toward the end of the evening, Chris was struggling. Loud social environments are genuinely difficult for people who process the world differently than the neurotypical majority, and Chris was reaching the end of what he could manage. Meg saw this and made the decision that any loving sibling in her position might make when they are young and not entirely sober and desperate to solve the immediate problem in front of them. She put him in the car and drove toward home. She was not sober enough to drive. The accident happened the way accidents happen in real life, which is without the dramatic warning that fiction provides, suddenly and completely and without the chance to choose differently. Both Meg and Chris were killed. The same night, Meg was driving. This detail is not incidental to the theory. It is load-bearing. When Lois learned what had happened, she was pregnant with Stewie. She had lost 2 children in a single night, and one of those children was responsible for the deaths of both. The grief of this, the specific and terrible complexity of this particular grief, which required her to mourn Meg as her daughter, while also holding the fact of what Meg had done, and to do all of this while carrying a child who would never know his siblings, was more than she found a way to live with. She died by suicide. Peter never met Stewie. He never had the chance to know who his youngest child might have become. Peter went to an institution. He has been there ever since. The world we watch every week is the world inside his head. He built it to hold his family, to give them somewhere to exist in the only space he has left to put them, which is the space behind his eyes. It is not a gentle world, because grief does not produce gentle reconstructions. It is a world that carries the marks of the catastrophe that produced it, even though the catastrophe itself is not visible in the dream. The marks are there in the way Meg is treated. The marks are there in the way Stewie is constructed. The marks are there in the shape of every character's existence, which reflects Peter's broken relationship to what each of them means to him. Meg is punished in the dream because some part of Peter's mind cannot forgive her for driving that car. He does not have access to the real memory. He does not experience it as a recollection of something that happened. But the resentment is part of who he is now, built into his neurology by the event, and even in the dream world he builds to hold his family, the resentment shapes her. She is ugly in the dream because she was beautiful in reality, and the beauty is part of what he cannot bear. She is unloved in the dream because some part of him cannot reach the love he had for her without the anger getting in the way first. He gives himself a daughter and then he cannot be her father, because being her father means feeling all of it, and feeling all of it is what put him in the institution in the first place. Chris is given a version of his disability that the dream world sanitizes into awkwardness and cluelessness. He is not the Chris who existed in reality, whose intellectual disability required real care and produced real challenges. He is a softer version, a version that allows Peter to have his son without having to carry the full weight of what that son's life was actually like. Peter loved Chris. The theory does not suggest otherwise. But loving Chris in reality required things of Peter that the dream cannot fully reconstruct, because the dream was built for survival, and some things are too heavy to carry even in dream form. Stewie is the child Peter never met. He is the projection of what Peter imagined Stewie might have been. Fathers imagine their children before they are born, imagine who they might become, attribute potential to them that is more about the father's hopes than the child's actual trajectory. Peter imagined an extraordinary child. He imagined someone with enormous capability, with an exceptional mind, with the force of personality that would make him someone to be reckoned with. And because Stewie never got to be anything other than imagined, the imagination ran free and produced someone of almost impossibly concentrated capability. He is brilliant because Peter needed to believe that the child he never knew had the potential for greatness. He is emotionally complex because Peter needed to believe that Stewie would have been capable of love in a way that the tragedy of his birth prevented him from ever expressing. Stewie's obsession with killing Lois, the defining motivation of the early seasons, is the theory's most painful detail. It is Peter's grief, compressed into the form of a baby who wants his mother dead. Peter's feelings about Lois's death, the anger and the love and the devastation and the persistent question of why, and the impossible ambivalence of someone who would have done anything to save her and also cannot entirely separate her death from his own loss, are not accessible to Peter in the institution. He has not processed them. He is not processing them. He is dreaming. And in the dream, the anger and the love and the loss get distributed to the baby who represents everything about Lois that Peter cannot directly address. Stewie loves Lois in his own complicated way because Peter loves Lois. Stewie wants to kill Lois because some part of Peter is furious at her for going, and babies, in the language of dreams, make perfect vessels for feelings too large and too dangerous to carry as yourself. Brian is the one character in the dream who is doing what the dream needs someone to do. He is thinking clearly. He is reasoning. He is trying to understand the situation and respond to it with something resembling adult intelligence. He is the part of Peter's mind that survived the catastrophe capable of rational thought, personified and put into the dream as a separate entity, because Peter cannot grant himself intelligence without the intelligence revealing that he is dreaming, and the dream serves a function that revelation would destroy. So the intelligent part of him is made a dog, which is to say it is made something adjacent to him but not quite him, close enough to keep the reasoning voice available, but far enough from his own identity to maintain the fragile architecture of the dream. The friends at the bar, Joe, Quagmire, Cleveland, are the people in the real world who visit Peter. They come to the institution. They sit with him in the specific way that people sit with someone who is not quite present, who is there in body but somewhere else in mind, trying to bridge the distance between where Peter is and where the rest of the world is, maintaining the connection even when the connection feels thin and uncertain. Inside the dream, they are his companions, his social world, the evidence that he belongs somewhere. Outside the dream, they are doing the most human thing that people can do for each other, which is showing up even when showing up is hard and the person you are showing up for is not entirely able to receive it. The most disturbing implication of this theory is not what it says about any specific character. It is what it says about the comedy. If Family Guy is Peter's dream, then every joke is a coping mechanism. Every cutaway gag is a thought moving through a shattered mind fast enough not to have to land on what it is really about. Every moment of cartoon violence that resolves without lasting consequence is a man teaching himself that harm can be funny. Because if harm can be funny, then maybe, eventually, the harm that destroyed his life can be made bearable by the distance that laughter creates. The laugh track is the sound of a man in a quiet room, laughing at his own pain so that it does not have to be pain. And every episode that ends with the family intact, with the house on Spooner Street still standing under the afternoon light, with Peter and Lois and the kids all present and accounted for, is one more night that Peter made it through. One more dream that held together long enough to get to the credits. The show continuing is Peter continuing. 25 years of Family Guy is 25 years of a grieving man keeping his family alive in the only way he has left. Section 4. The Scientific Case Against Peter Griffin. What antisocial personality patterns reveal? This section does not begin as theory. It begins as observation. The kind of observation that anyone who has watched the full arc of Peter Griffin's character development can make without requiring any alternative framework at all. Peter Griffin changed significantly. in ways that the people who study character arcs for a living find clinically interesting. The theory emerges from applying a clinical framework to those observable changes and following where that framework leads. In the first 3 seasons of Family Guy, Peter Griffin is a character type that comedy has produced many versions of, and that audiences have a well-developed emotional vocabulary for. He is the lovable idiot. He is Homer Simpson in Rhode Island, the man who wants to be a good husband and father and keeps failing at it through the particular combination of low intelligence, poor impulse control, and obliviousness to consequences that is the engine of this archetype's comedy. The archetype works because it is built on a fundamental goodness that the idiocy keeps undermining. You like this character because underneath the chaos he causes, you can feel that he means well, that he would be a good husband if he were capable of being a good husband, that he would be a good father if he were capable of being a good father. The goodness is real even when it is ineffective. The key diagnostic element is remorse. The lovable idiot feels bad when the damage lands. He looks at his wife or his child in the aftermath of whatever he has done, and he sees the hurt that his obliviousness produced, and he feels something about that hurt. He may not express it perfectly. He may express it clumsily, with a gesture that is well-intentioned but slightly off, with an apology that partially misses the point of what needs to be apologized for. But the feeling is there, and the attempt to address it is there, and these things, taken together, are what separate the lovable idiot from something less comfortable. The post-revival Peter Griffin loses the remorse. This is the specific change that the clinical framework makes most visible. Beginning in the middle seasons and becoming increasingly prominent through seasons 8, 9, 10, and beyond, Peter's response to the harm he causes shifts from discomfort to indifference. When confronted with evidence of what his actions have done to the people around him, he does not feel the sting of recognition. He does not experience the discomfort that is the natural response of a person with intact social bonding to being shown that they have hurt someone they love. He looks at the hurt, and it does not register the way it is supposed to register. The Seahorse Seashell Party episode is the clearest demonstration of this. Meg's speech in that episode is comprehensive, specific, and accurate. She is not exaggerating or being dramatic. She is cataloging, with the kind of precision that comes from years of careful observation, exactly what her father has done to her, and exactly what the pattern of his behavior indicates about how he regards her. This is not the kind of speech that a person with intact empathy can hear without responding to. It is the kind of speech that should produce the specific pain of recognition. The pain that comes when someone you love tells you, clearly and accurately, the cost of who you have been to them. Peter responds to it by laughing. Not defensively, not nervously, not with the laugh of someone who is uncomfortable because the words are hitting something real. He laughs because he finds it amusing. The words do not hit anything real because what they need to reach is not available. This is clinically significant. The specific absence of the response that the situation would normally produce is one of the defining features of what psychologists call antisocial personality patterns. It is not the presence of cruelty, though cruelty often accompanies it. It is the absence of the specific kind of pain that is produced by the recognition that you have hurt someone you are bonded to. When that pain is absent, something in the bonding structure is absent, or something in the capacity to register the emotional states of others as relevant to your own emotional experience is absent. Either way, the absence has consequences that extend throughout the person's social world in ways that tend to look, from the outside, like a choice to be cruel, but that from the inside, if the person has access to any self-awareness at all, feel more like a constitutional limitation than a decision. The behavior patterns across the later seasons that the clinical framework maps onto Peter, beyond the absence of remorse, include what the DSM-5 calls reckless disregard for the safety of self or others. This is not just the cartoon violence of animated comedy. Animated comedy regularly depicts characters being hurt in ways that no real physics would allow, and then being fine in the next scene, and this is a convention that nobody expects to be taken seriously as a literal depiction of physical reality. But the way Family Guy handles this convention changes across the seasons, in ways that are worth paying attention to. Early Peter's physical comedy is cartoonish in the specific way that means it is drawing on the traditions of slapstick, where the exaggeration of harm is the point, where the gap between what appears to happen and what the character actually experiences is the engine of the comedy. Nobody gets hurt the way the cartoon says they get hurt, because the cartoon is playing with the conventions of harm rather than depicting harm. This is a perfectly coherent comedic mode with a long history. Later, Peter's physical comedy is different. The violence becomes more graphic, more realistic in the specific and deliberate way that the animators draw it, more detailed in its depiction of injury in ways that push past cartoon slapstick towards something more unsettling. Characters are shown with injuries that are drawn with a level of anatomical specificity that goes beyond exaggeration into something that seems designed to make the audience uncomfortable rather than to amuse them. And Peter is frequently both the agent and the target of this escalating violence, in ways that suggest the show is not using him in the slapstick tradition, but in a different tradition, one where the point of the violence is not the gap between depicted and actual harm, but the violence itself. The clinical framework holds that this escalation in the graphic quality of the depicted harm is consistent with the profile of someone whose relationship to harm has become increasingly instrumental. When harm becomes a tool rather than a byproduct, when causing or experiencing physical damage is something you use deliberately rather than something you produce accidentally, the depiction of that harm changes character. It becomes more specific because specificity is part of the point. And in a character who has already demonstrated the absence of remorse that the clinical profile requires, this escalation in the specificity of depicted harm is exactly the trajectory the clinical profile would predict. The theory's most unsettling conclusion is about the relationship between this clinical portrait and the show's comic framing. Because the show has always framed Peter as a comedy character, as someone whose behavior is meant to be funny, as someone whose excesses the audience is supposed to experience as entertainment, rather than as something that requires a more serious response. And the clinical framework, applied to the specific behavior patterns the show depicts across its run, produces a subject who is not a comedy character. He is a man with significant antisocial personality features causing sustained harm to a family that cannot escape him, in a situation that, if it were happening in a real living room rather than an animated one, would constitute a genuine welfare crisis for the other people in that home. The laugh track in this reading is not proof that the show is okay. It is the mechanism by which the show's frame continuously reasserts itself against the content that keeps threatening to burst through it. Every laugh is the show asking you to maintain the comedy frame. Every uncomfortable moment that the laugh track covers over is the content pushing against the frame. And the question the theory leaves you with is, what would you see if you watched the show without the laugh track? What would the behavior look like if you removed the sound design that tells you how to feel about it? Section 5, The Evil is Real, Stewie Griffin's Suppressed Body Count. Let us be precise about what the show has established regarding Stewie Griffin's capabilities. He has built functional time travel devices, multiple times, across multiple seasons. He has built teleportation technology. He has constructed directed energy weapons of various kinds, including laser weapons and freeze weapons, and devices capable of altering the weather. He has built mind control technology that has demonstrably affected the behavior of other characters. He has built a machine capable of de-aging individuals. He has built simulation technology sophisticated enough to produce environments indistinguishable from physical reality. All of these things are canonical within the show's fiction. They function. Their functioning has been demonstrated in ways that affect the main narrative, rather than being contained to Stewie's own subplot. The suppression theory builds from this established base, and extends it by asking a question that the show raises, and then consistently declines to answer. When Stewie aims a functional weapon at a person and the person does not die, what actually happened? In the pilot episode, Stewie aims a working weapon at Lois. The weapon functions. It fires. Lois does not die. The show moves past this without accounting for the gap between what the weapon is capable of and what the outcome appears to be. This happens again, and again, and again, across seasons of the show. Across hundreds of attempts against Lois and various other targets, Stewie aims working weapons at people who do not subsequently die in the way that the weapons he builds should guarantee. One possible explanation is that the weapons keep failing at critical moments, a coincidence so persistent and so specific in its timing that it strains credibility as coincidence. Another possible explanation is that something intervenes each time, but the interventions are themselves improbable enough in their consistency to raise the same question about what is doing the intervening. The suppression theory offers a third explanation. Some of the attempts did not fail, some of them succeeded. Some of them produced the consequence that Stewie intended. And then Stewie, who has a time machine and has demonstrated both the capability and the willingness to use it to alter events after the fact, went back and erased those successes. The audience is watching the timeline after Stewie's corrections. The show we have been watching for 25 years is the edited version, the version from which the successful murders have been removed by the murderer using technology that he has already demonstrated he possesses and is willing to use. The canonical support for this reading comes primarily from the Season 12 Christmas episode in which Stewie saves Brian's life. Brian is killed in the Life of Brian episode, hit by a car, and dying in the family driveway. The death is played straight. It is devastating. The family mourns. A new dog named Vinny is brought in and becomes part of the household. The show commits to the death fully enough that it ran for 2 episodes with Brian absent, giving enough time for the emotional reality of the loss to establish itself. Then, in the Christmas episode, Stewie encounters his past self during a time travel sequence, takes that past self's time travel device, and goes back in time to the moment before the car hit Brian. He saves Brian. The timeline is altered. Brian lives. The 2 episodes in which Brian was dead are now, within the show's logic, episodes from a timeline that was subsequently changed. They depict events that happened and then were unhappened. The audience watched both the death and the undeath, which means the audience watched the show in a relationship to its own timeline that is considerably more complex than standard television continuity would suggest. This is not the show retroactively deciding to undo a mistake. This is the show explicitly depicting a character using time travel to alter events after the fact, showing the audience the original timeline and the altered one, and expecting the audience to understand that the altered one is now the operative reality. Which means the show has established, within its own canon, the principle that events can be shown, experienced as real, and then retroactively unhappened by a character with the appropriate technology. The suppression theory applies this principle to Stewie's attacks on Lois. If Stewie succeeded in any of those attacks, the success produced a state of affairs that Stewie subsequently decided he did not want. Not because he does not want Lois dead. He has made clear, across many seasons, that wanting Lois dead is a significant part of his character. But wanting Lois dead and actually having Lois be dead may be different things, for reasons that the later seasons of the show develop in ways that are relevant to the theory. Stewie's relationship with Lois becomes more complex as the show progresses. The early evil baby who wanted nothing more than her destruction gives way to a character who, in specific episodes and moments, shows genuine affection for her, who misses her when she is absent, who, despite the ongoing rhetorical commitment to wanting her dead, behaves in ways that suggest the actual relationship is more layered than the stated intention. It is possible that Stewie has tried to kill Lois, succeeded at various points, experienced the world in which she is dead, and found that world less satisfying than the stated goal suggested it would be. It is possible that the erasures are not just about protecting himself from consequences. They are about protecting a relationship that he values more than he can admit. Brian's position in this reading becomes the theory's most morally complicated element. Brian knows about the time machine. He has been present for demonstrations of Stewie's capabilities. He has traveled through time with Stewie. He understands what Stewie is capable of, including the retroactive alteration of timelines, because he has experienced the product of that alteration directly. He is alive because of it. And Brian has not exposed any of this. He has not gone to the family and said, clearly and specifically, the things that he knows about Stewie and that the family should probably know. He has maintained the friendship. He has protected the secret. He has chosen the relationship over the accountability, consistently, across the entire run of the show. The "and then there were fewer" episode, the one McFarlane confirmed as a canonical episode with permanent real deaths, provides the clearest and most direct evidence for the theory's central claim. At the episode's climax, with Diane Simmons about to murder Lois at gunpoint at the edge of a cliff, Diane is shot from behind. The shot is taken from an upstairs window of the house at significant distance. It is clean, precise, and fatal. When the shot is revealed to have come from Stewie, equipped with a suppressed sniper rifle, the show presents this as a somewhat dark joke, the punchline being that Stewie vows that the only one who gets to kill Lois is him. But the logistics of the moment are not a joke. Stewie had to have brought the rifle to this event. He had to have identified the window from which to take the shot before the crisis arose. He had to have monitored the situation from that position closely enough to recognize the precise moment at which Lois's life was in genuine danger from another party. He made the kill shot at significant range on a target in motion near a cliff edge. He did all of this at age 1. This is not impulsivity. This is practiced capability. This is someone who has done something like this before, enough times to have developed the skill and the habit of preparation. The suppression theory says that the reason Stewie is this capable is the same reason any human develops capability: practice. And the practice exists in timelines that the audience never saw because Stewie erased them. The murders are real. The murders are simply in the past of a timeline that has been edited to exclude them. What we are watching is the corrected version of a show that has a body count the audience has never been shown. Section 6. The Dog Who Should Be Gone. Brian Griffin's Extended Stay. The mathematics of Brian Griffin's situation are not comfortable to do, but they are straightforward. Brian is, within the show's internal timeline, established as 10 years old as of fairly recent seasons. He was 6 at the start of the show. The show premiered in January 1999. By any reasonable mapping of real time onto the show's fiction, Brian Griffin has been alive for longer than the natural lifespan of a Labrador Retriever, which is typically somewhere between 10 and 12 years. By the time the show hits its 25th anniversary, Brian is either the oldest Labrador alive or the show's relationship to time has become so disconnected from reality that the number is meaningless, or both. The show is aware of this. It has been aware of it for a long time and has addressed it at several points, with varying degrees of seriousness. The most direct and most striking address is in The Thin White Line, a second season episode in which Peter explicitly tells Brian that Brian will die approximately 50 years before Peter does. This is not played as a permanent threat. It is played as a reminder of a fact that both of them are aware of and that neither of them finds particularly comfortable to dwell on. But it is in the text of the show. The lifespan gap is canonical. Brian's eventual death is canonical. And the show depicting Brian continuing to exist decade after decade in apparent good health despite his years is a canonical anomaly that the show has never fully accounted for. The theory about Brian builds from this anomaly and from the events of the Life of Brian episode, which aired in season 12. In that episode, Brian was hit by a car and died. The death was depicted with full emotional weight. The family gathered around him in the driveway. Stewie held his hand. Brian was frightened, and then he said his goodbyes, and then he was gone. The fan reaction was enormous and genuine, the kind of reaction that demonstrates how real a character has become to the people who watch them. Petitions were signed. Social media went into genuine mourning. The character trended nationally for days. 2 episodes later, he was back. Stewie saved him by going back in time and preventing the accident. The Life of Brian timeline, the one in which Brian actually died in the driveway and the family spent 2 episodes adapting to his absence, was retroactively unhappened, replaced by the timeline in which Stewie's intervention had prevented the death. Brian lived. Everything went back to normal. The theory holds that what came back from the Christmas guy's retroactive save is not quite the same Brian who died in the driveway, not different in ways that are obvious or that the show acknowledges. The other characters do not notice any difference. The show does not frame the return as anything other than the joyful restoration of something beloved. But the theory points to the behavioral trajectory of Brian in the seasons following his return as evidence that something is not quite right. The traits that defined Brian at his worst, his selfishness, his hypocrisy, his cruelty when threatened, his willingness to harm others in the service of his own ego, these traits become more pronounced rather than less pronounced after his return. The moments of genuine warmth become less frequent. The moments of genuine ugliness become more prominent. The arc of his character, which was already in decline before his death, resumes its decline after his return, but at a steeper angle. This could be attributed to the ongoing degradation of the character that the show's critics have documented across many seasons. But the theory offers a different frame. What if the Brian who returned is not the original Brian? What if the soul that said goodbye in the driveway went where it was supposed to go? And what came back through Stewie's temporal intervention was a version of Brian, close enough to pass, assembled from the last accessible moment of the original's existence, but not carrying whatever it was that the original had learned or become by the time of his death? The gun in the safety deposit box becomes the theory's most important piece of evidence. Before his death, Brian had the gun. He had it because there were times when his existence felt heavier than he could easily carry, and the gun was an exit option, a way of maintaining some sense of sovereignty over a situation that frequently felt beyond his control. After his return, the gun is not referenced. But if the theory is right, the Brian who returned carries the weight of being something that should not exist in this timeline, something that was supposed to have ended and did not, and that weight, even without conscious awareness of it, would produce exactly the kind of existential heaviness that the gun was originally a response to. The relationship between Brian's impossible survival and the broader question of why nothing on Spooner Street ever ends is the theory's most resonant point. Brian should have died. He is alive because Stewie intervened. Stewie's intervention represents a choice to keep someone in a world past their natural endpoint, out of love. And if that is what is happening to Brian, specifically and demonstrably, then the theory raises the question of whether something analogous is happening to everyone on Spooner Street. Whether the reason the Griffins never die, never leave, never conclude, is that something or someone is making the same intervention for all of them that Stewie made for Brian, keeping them here because letting them go is unacceptable, because the alternative is a Spooner Street that is empty and dark, and whatever is invested in Spooner Street remaining occupied cannot tolerate that. Section 7. The Witness Who Had to Leave. Cleveland Brown's Exile. Cleveland Brown was one of the founding members of the Drunken Clam Table. He was Peter Griffin's friend from the beginning, from season 1, sitting at the same table, drinking the same beer, offering his particular brand of patient, decent, perceptive response to whatever chaos the week had produced. He was the one who noticed things that the others did not notice. He was the one who, when the situation called for a reasonable perspective, tended to have one. He was, in the specific language of the show's sociology, the one who was paying attention in the right way. He left in season 7, heading south to Virginia for a spin-off series that ran for 4 seasons and ended in 2013, after which he came back to Spooner Street and picked up where he had left off. The theory about why Cleveland left focuses not on the opportunity the spin-off represented, but on the necessity the departure addressed. Cleveland, the theory holds, left because he was the one who could see clearly what he was living inside, and what he could see clearly had become intolerable. Consider what persistent decency does to a person who is surrounded by things that decent people cannot make peace with. It does not make you comfortable. It does not make you able to engage with those things on the terms that the people around you have chosen to engage with them. It makes you perpetually uncomfortable, and the discomfort does not go away because you stay and try to hold the line, because the line is not actually being held by anyone else, and you are one person and the current runs against you. The truly decent person in an indecent community does not eventually reach accommodation with the indecency. They eventually reach a point of unbearable clarity, where what is happening is so fully visible to them and so far from anything they can find a way to accept that staying becomes more costly than leaving. Cleveland reached that point, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulated weight of years of watching Peter cause damage and face no consequences. Of watching Quagmire do what Quagmire does and watching the community absorb it the way communities absorb things they have decided not to confront. Of watching Joe make the choice, again and again, of personal loyalty over professional responsibility. Of watching a neighborhood that should be capable of being better than it is choosing, consistently and collectively, to be exactly what it is. He went south because he needed to build something that was actually his, that actually worked the way things should work. That had real consequences and real growth, and real people responding to real situations with the full weight of their moral agency rather than with the managed blindness that Spooner Street had developed into an art form. The spin-off, read through this lens, is not a creative expansion of the shared world. It is a man rebuilding himself outside the environment that was slowly dismantling him. Cleveland Brown in Stoolbend, Virginia is someone attempting to be fully who he is, without the constant pressure of a community organized around being something else. He is trying to find out what he is capable of when the conditions for it are actually present. He gets to be the fully decent person he always appeared to be at the Drunken Clam, in an environment where that decency can actually do something. Then the spinoff was canceled and he came back, and everything was exactly as he had left it. Peter was exactly who Peter had been. Quagmire was exactly who Quagmire had always been. The Drunken Clam looked the same. Joe made the same choice between personal loyalty and professional responsibility. The neighborhood was unchanged. And Cleveland sat down at the table and smiled his patient smile and resumed his position in the group without anyone acknowledging that he had tried to leave, and found that the leaving did not take. The theory's most haunting observation is that Spooner Street is a place that permits departures but does not permit absences. You can leave, but the leaving does not change anything about what you are leaving, and when circumstances bring you back, everything that you left is waiting for you in exactly the position it was in when you went. It does not miss you. It does not change in response to your absence. It simply waits, the way a place that has decided not to change waits for the people who thought they were done with it to discover that they were wrong. Section 8. The Town's Agreement. Quagmire and the Community That Decided. Glenn Quagmire's behavior across the run of Family Guy is one of the most explicitly documented patterns of harmful conduct in any long-running comedy series. The show has not tried to hide it. It has not even tried to code it. Multiple episodes depict Quagmire engaging in statutory rape, sexual assault, and a range of predatory behaviors that the show sometimes plays for laughs and sometimes, in moments of unusual candor, frames as genuinely wrong. In the Quagmire's Mom episode, the show explicitly labels certain of his behaviors as crimes and puts him on trial for them, although the trial ultimately produces no lasting consequence. In the Screams of Silence episode, the show depicts his sister being physically abused and positions Quagmire as a righteous protector who ultimately takes violent action to end the abuse. The theory built around Quagmire is not, at its core, about Quagmire. It is about the community that contains him. Because Quagmire does not operate in a vacuum, he operates within a social world that has made specific choices about how to respond to what he is and what he does. And those choices, cataloged and examined, reveal something about how communities sustain people like Quagmire that goes well beyond the specific fictional neighborhood of the show. The first mechanism is the normalization that comes from humor. Quagmire's sexual behavior has been framed as comedy by the show from his earliest appearances. The catchphrase, the double entendres, the sight gags, the running jokes about his orientation to women, framed consistently as exaggerated but harmless male desire rather than as what it more often functionally is. Humor is extraordinarily effective as a normalization mechanism because it creates a social frame within which the labeled behavior is expected and understood in a particular way, and within that frame, taking the behavior seriously becomes a kind of violation of the social compact that the humor establishes. If everyone is laughing, taking it seriously makes you the difficult person, the one who cannot take a joke, the one who is missing the point. The people around Quagmire have been in the same social frame for long enough that the frame has become the default. Joe is a police officer who has seen enough of Quagmire's behavior to have professional grounds for action on multiple occasions. Joe makes the personal choice instead. He chooses the friend over the law, which is a choice that real people in real communities make with real consequences for the people who do not benefit from the friendship protection. Peter is Quagmire's other close friend and the social nucleus around which the friend group operates. Peter's relationship with Quagmire has always implicitly validated Quagmire's belonging to the community, which validates Quagmire's access to the social situations his behavior requires. Without Peter's foundational acceptance, the rest of the community's acceptance would be structurally weaker. The second mechanism is the selective visibility of harm. Quagmire's behavior tends to be directed at women who exist at the margins of the show's social world. Women who appear in specific episodes and do not persist as recurring characters, women who are not embedded in the community's social network in ways that would give them advocates within it. The harm is real, but it is not visible in ways that the community is required to respond to, because the people harmed do not stay in the community's field of vision long enough for the harm to become a sustained presence. It happens, and then the person it happened to is gone from the show, and the community continues without having to hold the weight of it. Brenda, Quagmire's sister, is the exception that proves this rule. Brenda is embedded in the community's network through her relationship with Quagmire. Her harm is visible to people within the social web in a way that the harm done to episodic characters is not. And the community's response to Brenda's harm is dramatically different from its response to the harm done to women who are not inside the web. The community mobilizes. Peter and Joe participate in the murder of Jeff. The harm to Brenda produces a response that the harm to other women does not produce, because Brenda's connection to the community makes her harm the community's business in a way that the other harms were not. The third mechanism, and the one the theory finds most important, is the good deed economy. Quagmire, across the show's run, does things that are genuinely good. He protects people he loves. He shows warmth and loyalty in specific contexts. He has moments of genuine honor. These moments are real within the text. The theory does not deny them. But in communities organized around the protection of members whose behavior is problematic, good deeds function as social currency that purchases continued belonging and continued forgiveness. Every positive thing Quagmire does becomes a deposit in an account that the community draws on when deciding how to respond to the negative things. And the accounting, as communities typically do it, tends to favor the interpretation that makes continued belonging possible, because exclusion is socially disruptive and belonging is comfortable, and the people doing the accounting are also the people who benefit from the comfort. Screams of Silence is the episode the theory returns to most often, because it crystallizes the contradiction at the heart of the community's relationship to Quagmire. The episode is genuinely serious about the harm Jeff inflicts on Brenda. It does not play it for laughs. It shows the reality of it and gives it the weight it deserves. And it positions Quagmire as the person who takes the decisive action to end it. He is the hero. The audience roots for him. The resolution of the episode, in which Jeff is killed and Brenda is free, is structured as a morally satisfying outcome. But Quagmire is someone who, in other episodes, has done what Jeff does, in different forms, to women who were not inside the community's social web. The show expects you to root for Quagmire here, and also to laugh at Quagmire's behavior in the other episodes, and it does not acknowledge the incompatibility of these two responses. The theory says that the incompatibility is the point. It says that Family Guy has built, with more accuracy than it probably intended, a portrait of exactly how communities maintain the contradiction between protecting some of their members while also sustaining members who harm others. The contradiction is not a failure of coherent writing. It is a faithful depiction of how communities actually work. Section 9. The Mother Who Manages. Lois Griffin's Hidden Architecture. Lois Griffin has always been presented as the reasonable center of an unreasonable family, the one who tries to maintain normalcy, the one whose patience is the buffer between the chaos of the Griffin household and total dysfunction, the good mother, the long-suffering wife, the person who, despite everything, keeps the family going. The theory about Lois proposes that this framing is itself the mechanism of her most significant failure. That what looks like the reasonable center is actually a sophisticated management system. That what looks like patience is actually a controlled allocation of emotional labor that consistently privileges the maintenance of family equilibrium over the well-being of individual family members, specifically one of them. Lois comes from Carter Pewterschmidt. This is not incidental background information. Carter is one of the most thoroughly terrible people in the show's fictional world, and he is terrible in the specific and particular way that has demonstrably shaped Lois's understanding of how families are supposed to work. Carter is the man who put his own son Patrick in a psychiatric institution for 30 years, not to protect Patrick or to ensure his care, but because Patrick's breakdown was embarrassing and his existence as a damaged person was incompatible with the image the Pewterschmidts worked to maintain. Carter then maintained the secret of Patrick's institutionalization from his own daughter for those 30 years. Lois grew up not knowing she had a brother, not knowing that her father had made a decision about a family member that erased that member from the family's visible story for 3 decades. This is the environment in which Lois's understanding of family formed. This is the context within which she developed her ideas about how families handle members who are inconvenient, who are difficult, who complicate the story the family is trying to tell about itself. The Pewterschmidt answer to these members is not compassion and integration. It is management and containment. It is the careful, patient, sustained minimization of the inconvenient member until they occupy only as much of the family's emotional and social space as the family has decided they deserve. Lois has applied this inherited architecture to the Griffin family. The theory holds that this was not a conscious decision, not a deliberate strategy, but the deep structural inheritance of someone who grew up watching this management system operate and absorbed it as the natural and correct way for families to respond to difficulty. She loves her children. The theory does not argue otherwise, but her love for Meg is consistently and reliably overridden by her commitment to the equilibrium of the family system, which requires Meg to occupy a specific position, a position at the bottom where she absorbs what would otherwise be distributed through the family in more disruptive ways. The evidence for this reading is in Lois's behavior in moments when she has the opportunity to protect Meg and chooses not to. When Peter makes cruel comments about Meg in Lois's presence, Lois does not consistently and forcefully intervene. She may moderate occasionally. She may redirect briefly. But she does not make the choice that a mother who is genuinely committed to her daughter's well-being would make, which is to make it clear, unambiguously and with consequence, that this behavior is not acceptable and will not be tolerated. She does not make this choice because making it would disturb the equilibrium that she manages, and the equilibrium requires Meg to be available as the family's pressure release valve. This is the Pewter-Schmidt solution, scaled down from the institution to the household. Carter managed Patrick's inconvenience by putting him somewhere invisible. Lois manages Meg's vulnerability by keeping her in a position where the family's dysfunction can flow toward her, rather than spreading through the system in ways that would be harder to contain. It is not cruel in the overt way that Peter's cruelty toward Meg is cruel. It is the quiet cruelty of the administrator, the one who maintains the structure that makes the overt cruelty possible by declining to challenge it. The Peter's Sister episode is the theory's most significant textual reference. In that season 14 episode, it is revealed that Peter's pattern of behavior toward Meg has roots in his own experience of being bullied and abused by his sister Karen. The show uses this revelation to produce a genuine reconciliation scene between Peter and Meg, a scene in which both characters reach something real and important together, something that suggests the relationship might be capable of becoming different from what it has been. Lois is present for this. She witnesses the reconciliation. And then the next episodes proceed as if the reconciliation did not happen. Meg is back at the bottom. Peter is back to his characteristic behaviors. The structural reality of the household has reasserted itself over the genuine moment of connection that the episode produced. The theory's question is about Lois's role in that reassertion. Did she do anything to protect what was built in that moment? Did she create the conditions, in the episodes that followed, for the reconciliation to persist rather than be erased? The text suggests she did not. And the theory says that her not doing so is not an accident of character or a failure of attention. It is the management system operating as designed. The equilibrium requires the reset. The equilibrium is Lois's priority. And so the reset comes. Section 10, Infinite Windows, the Cutaway Multiverse. In the Season 8 premiere Road to the Multiverse, Stewie explains to Brian the theoretical basis of what they are about to do. There are, he says, infinite universes coexisting on parallel dimensional planes, each one the result of different decisions and different outcomes, each one real, each one containing real people, living real lives within its specific reality. He has a device that allows him and Brian to navigate between these universes. He has used this device before. He will use it again. The universes they visit in the episode, ranging from the world where Christianity never existed and science progressed unimpeded through the medieval period, to a Disney animated version of their own reality, to a prehistoric universe, to a universe that resembles the stop-motion animation of Robot Chicken, are real places. The inhabitants of these places are real inhabitants. The Disney Stewie who leads the family in a musical number lives in a universe where that is what reality looks like. And from inside his reality, it is as real as Stewie's reality is from inside his. This episode does not just introduce a concept, it establishes a metaphysical fact about the show's world. Parallel universes exist within the show's fiction. Every possible outcome of every possible decision point has a universe where it is the actual outcome. This is not a one-time plot device. It is a property of the reality the show operates in. And if it is a property of the reality the show operates in, it applies to everything the show depicts, including the cutaway gags. The cutaway gag is Family Guy's most distinctive formal innovation and its most frequently deployed comedy tool. It is also, upon examination through the multiverse lens, something considerably more disturbing than a comedy technique. Because if alternate universes are real within this fiction, and if every cutaway depicts something that someone says happened, or that a character references as a memory or comparison point, then what the cutaway is showing is not a joke, it is a window. A window into a specific alternate universe where that specific thing actually happened, where that specific event is part of the real history of that specific place, where the people depicted in the cutaway are real people who lived through whatever the cutaway shows. The gags that are merely absurd, in which historical figures or celebrities or fictional characters appear in unlikely combinations doing unlikely things, are disturbing through this lens in a relatively mild way. They imply universes with very strange histories, which is philosophically interesting but not emotionally overwhelming. But the cutaways that depict harm are something else. The ones where characters die, the ones where characters are injured or humiliated or destroyed, the ones where Peter's behavior or Quagmire's behavior or the behavior of any other character produces damage that, in the main timeline, is treated as a punchline, and in the cutaway universe is a real event with real consequences. In the cutaway universe, the person who was just killed in a gag is dead. Their family is grieving, their friends are dealing with the loss. The ripples of their absence are spreading through the people whose lives were shaped by their presence. None of this is visible in the cutaway because the cutaway only shows you the moment, the specific event or image that functions as the punchline. But the moment exists in a universe with before and the after of a moment in which someone dies is the full weight of everything that follows from that death. The main timeline characters reference these events casually. They use them as comparison points, as illustrations, as the jokes they tell at each other's expense. Peter says this is worse than the time, and the screen cuts to a universe where a specific terrible thing happened to a specific person. The specific person experienced that terrible thing. It was their terrible thing to experience. The full reality of it was theirs to carry, and Peter is using it as a punchline. This makes the cutaway gags, collectively and systematically, something like the main timeline's relationship to the suffering of an infinite number of alternate selves. The comedy of the main timeline is built on the genuine distress of the cutaway universes, and the main timeline characters engage with that distress without apparent awareness that it is real. They cannot know that the alternate universes are real, because knowing would mean confronting something about the comedy that the comedy cannot survive. But Stewie knows. Stewie has visited the alternate universes. He has the device. He understands, in a way that none of the other characters do, that every reference to every event is a reference to something that actually happened somewhere. He carries this knowledge and has never shared it, which is the kind of thing you carry when you are not sure whether sharing it would improve anything, or simply distribute the burden of knowing it to people who are not equipped to do anything with it. Section 11. Death's Favorite Family. Why the Grim Reaper Keeps Coming Back. The classical Grim Reaper is, in most cultural depictions, a figure of absolute impersonality. He is the inevitability. He is the force that does not have preferences or favorites or feelings about the specific individuals he collects. He arrives when it is time and he does what he does and he leaves, and the universe continues without him having formed any attachment to the people whose final moments he witnesses. This impersonality is part of what makes the figure frightening. The absence of any relationship, any consideration, any recognition of individual identity in the face of the structural fact of ending. Family Guy's death is nothing like this. Family Guy's death is, in the most literal sense, a person. He has a mother whom he calls and visits. He has a social life, complicated as it is by his professional obligations. He has preferences, opinions, memories of his personal history. He was a teenager once, with a romantic life complicated by the specific professional hazard of his situation. He has participated in films he is not proud of. He has opinions about food. He wears a Providence College sweatsuit when his robes are not required. He is, despite the best efforts of his job description, thoroughly and completely a being with interiority. This personhood, which the show established in the Season 2 episode Death is a Bitch and has maintained across his subsequent appearances, is the foundation of the theory. Because a being with interiority is a being who can form attachments. A being with preferences is a being who has favorites. And a being who is professionally required to be impartial is a being who might, under the right circumstances, fail to be impartial in ways that have consequences for the people on the receiving end of that partiality. The circumstances under which Death first encountered the Griffins were unusual, in ways that the theory holds were consequential for everything that followed. Peter had claimed to be dead on an insurance form, to avoid paying a hospital bill. This triggered Death's professional obligation. Someone had declared death. Death was required to arrive and confirm or process it. Death arrived. Peter ran. Death, who presumably does not spend much of his professional time being run from in this particular way, pursued Peter, fell, and injured his ankle. He could not work. He was required to rest. He ended up in the Griffin's living room wearing Peter's college sweatsuit and eating fruit cups from the refrigerator and watching television with a family that treated his presence as a logistical inconvenience rather than a cosmic visitation. This response, the ordinary human response of finding a way to manage an unusual houseguest, rather than reacting with the existential terror that most people experience in the presence of death, is what the theory holds was the pivot point. For possibly the first time in the entire history of his existence, Death spent time in the presence of living people who were not afraid of him in the way that living people are afraid of him. They were annoyed. They were managing. They were going about the ordinary business of the household around him, asking him if he wanted another fruit cup, leaving him with the television while they went to deal with other things. They treated him, in other words, like a person. Like a specific person who happened to be in the house at a specific time, who had certain needs and certain limitations, and who was going to be dealt with in the practical way that one deals with unexpected guests. No living person had ever done this before. Death had never been treated this way, and something about being treated this way reached him in a way that his normal interactions, which are definitionally terminal for one party, have no capacity to reach him. He keeps coming back. The theory says that the Griffins are, for Death, the one household in existence where his presence does not produce the response that his presence normally produces, where he can spend time in the company of living people, without everything about that time being organized around the fact that he is about to end their lives, where he is a guest rather than an inevitability, where someone asks how his ankle is healing. This attachment has professional consequences. The theory does not hold that death has made the Griffins immune or immortal. They can still be hurt. They can still be killed. Death still comes for them when their time is technically up. But technical and actual are two different things. When the person responsible for making technical actual has feelings about it, death hesitates. Death finds reasons to be elsewhere. At the critical moment, death arrives slightly late, or processes the situation in ways that give the Griffins an extra moment to find their way out of it. He is not saving them. He is not making a definitive choice to spare them. He is simply not quite able to apply the full weight of his professional function to people he has eaten fruit cups with. The saddest dimension of the theory is what this implies about the Griffin situation. If they are in purgatory, death's partiality is keeping them in purgatory longer than their curriculum requires. If Peter is dreaming, death's unwillingness to interrupt the dream is an act of compassion toward a man whose grief he may not consciously understand, but that his specific kind of awareness, the awareness that comes from having witnessed every death there has ever been, recognizes and responds to. If Stewie is maintaining the timeline, death's partiality is what allows Stewie's interventions to succeed, because the interventions only work if death consents to undo his own previous collecting, which requires death to decide, at some level, that he is okay with a specific person not having stayed gone. He keeps coming back to Spooner Street because it is the only place in the universe where someone has ever offered him a fruit cup and meant it. And in an existence defined entirely by endings, a fruit cup offered by someone who has no idea they are about to die and who does not particularly care that you are the one who is going to end them, is worth considerably more than its nutritional value might suggest. Section 12. The Grand Unified Theory. Spooner Street is already over. All of the theories this video has covered, taken individually, are compelling frameworks for understanding specific features of Family Guy's strangeness. But taken together, arranged in relation to each other, allowed to interact and inform each other, they form something that is larger than any one of them. They form an emergent understanding of what the show is, at the level that sits below all of its comedy and all of its noise and all of its decades of continuous existence. They form a picture of a place that is already over. A place that ended, at some point, in some way, and what we are watching is not the ongoing life of that place but the residue of it, the echo of it, the way that the specific configuration of people and relationships and habits and damage that constituted Spooner Street continues to exist in the space where Spooner Street used to be, cycling through its patterns without the forward motion that would eventually bring the patterns to completion. Every theory points to this in its own way. The purgatory theory says the residents are dead and are cycling through purgatorial lessons they have not yet fully completed. The mental institution theory says the residents exist only inside the broken mind of a man whose actual family is gone, and what we are watching is the broken mind's attempt to hold on to something it cannot reach. The suppression theory says the timeline has been altered so many times that what we are watching is the current edited version of events, from which the actual endings have been removed. The Brian theory says the family includes at least one member who is living past their natural endpoint, in a state of extended and technically inappropriate continuation. The death theory says that the mechanism of ending has been informally suspended for this specific household out of something that resembles affection. The multiverse theory says the events of the show exist in an infinite number of variations simultaneously, and none of them can be considered final. The lowest theory says the family is maintained in its configuration by an invisible architecture of management that prevents genuine resolution. The Meg theory says that the family's most genuinely progressing member is being held in place by the structure that the most regressed member maintains. All of these things point to the same central fact. Something is keeping Spooner Street exactly as it is. Something is resisting the endings that these situations would naturally reach. Something does not want the Griffins to resolve, to graduate, to complete, to arrive at wherever their arcs are naturally heading. And the show, across 25 years of episodes, has never given us the name of the something. But it has given us all of the evidence we need to understand what the something does, which is maintain the eternal Tuesday afternoon of a fictional Rhode Island household in a state of suspended animation that looks, from the outside, exactly like ordinary life. The most disturbing thing about this conclusion is not the conclusion itself. It is the recognition that the show has been building this picture from the very beginning, and that most viewers, most of the time, have been watching it through the comedy frame the show provides and seeing only the comedy. The laugh track says laugh. The cutaway gag says keep moving. The reset says everything is fine. And most of the time, most of us take those cues and feel what we are told to feel and move on. But the evidence has always been there. It has always been available to anyone who is paying enough attention and asking enough questions. The gaps have always been there. The strangeness has always been there. The moments where the comedy frame strains against what it is trying to contain have always been there, season after season, available to anyone who looked. The theories this video covers are what you find when you look. They are what the gaps have always been pointing toward. They are the stories the show is telling underneath the story it tells out loud. And now that you have heard them, the house on Spooner Street is going to look a little different. The light in the windows is going to have a slightly different quality. The laugh track is going to land slightly differently against your ear. Because you know now what the theories say that the light in those windows might actually be, and what the laugh track might actually be covering over, and what the family gathered inside that house might actually be doing, night after night, episode after episode, in that gentle and permanent and slightly uncanny nowhere that television creates when it never lets anything end. They are still there. They are always there. And they are working on something. And maybe, eventually, someday, they will figure out what it is. You made it to the end of this one, which means you are exactly the kind of person who belongs in this community, and I am genuinely glad you are here. This took a long time to put together, and I hope it gave you something to think about tonight, or this morning, or whenever it is where you are. If something in here changed how you see the show, or just kept you good company through the night, drop a like. It takes a moment, and it means something. And if you want to be here for what comes next, which will be worth your time, a subscribe is free and it means you will not miss it. Until the next one, sleep well. The light is still on in the house on Spooner Street. It always is. End of script. Extended section. The deep architecture of the purgatory theory. Characters in the balance. The purgatory theory, covered in summary form in Section 2, deserves considerably more elaboration because its implications extend much further than a surface reading suggests, and the details of those implications reveal patterns in the show's structure that are genuinely illuminating regardless of whether you accept the metaphysical premise. Consider first the question of what purgatory actually is, in the theological tradition the theory draws from. Purgatory is not hell, which is a place of punishment without end or purpose. Purgatory is a place of education. It is a state of existence organized around the development of the soul toward a condition that makes it capable of something the soul is not currently capable of. The conditions of purgatory are tailored to each individual's specific spiritual need, which means that purgatory is not one place but an infinite number of individualized situations, each one designed with precision for the specific person it is meant to educate. The punishment, such as it is not the purpose. The transformation is the purpose. And the conditions that produce the suffering are the conditions most precisely calculated to produce the specific transformation that individual soul requires. When you apply this understanding to the Griffin family, the specific conditions of each character's existence become legible in a way they are not when viewed as the product of comedy writing alone. The conditions are not arbitrary, they are tailored. Each character's specific situation addresses their specific failure with a precision that goes beyond what lazy characterization or declining writing quality could account for. Peter's condition is not just stupidity, it is a very specific kind of incapacity, the inability to think carefully about consequences, which is precisely the capacity that his pre-purgatorial existence required him to develop, and which he consistently refused to develop. His purgatory does not make him cruel in the designed way. His cruelty is a byproduct of his incapacity. He damages people not because damage is his goal, but because the capacity for thinking carefully about how his choices affect others is what his purgatory has removed. And without that capacity, a person with genuine desires and emotions and impulses will inevitably produce damage. His lesson is not to stop being selfish. His lesson is to develop the willingness to think. The show's moments where Peter exercises something like wisdom, where he pauses before acting, where he considers the person in front of him before responding, are him touching the edges of the lesson rather than completing it. Brian's condition is not just the indignity of being a dog in a world that does not take dogs seriously. It is the specific indignity of having your claims to sophistication and intelligence constantly undermined by the most visible and indelible fact of your existence, your body. Brian's real-world failure was the gap between who he claimed to be and who he actually was, a gap he maintained by never exposing himself to contexts where the gap would become visible. His purgatory closes that gap with extreme prejudice. The gap is now structural. The aspiration and the limitation are simultaneously present in his body, in ways that no performance of sophistication can bridge. He wants to be taken seriously. He cannot be taken seriously, not in the world beyond the Griffin household, not by anyone who encounters him for the first time and sees a dog standing upright and talking about literature. He can be as witty and as well-read as he actually is, and it changes nothing about the fundamental picture his presence presents. The lesson his purgatory is designed to teach him involves the relationship between intelligence and humility. Genuine intelligence, properly understood, does not require external validation to be real. The value of a thought is not contingent on whether someone with the appropriate credentials acknowledges it. Wisdom, which is what intelligence eventually becomes if it is developed toward its proper end, operates without needing to be seen. Brian's lesson is whether he can reach the point of being genuinely intelligent without needing anyone to confirm that he is. Whether he can hold his actual qualities without using them as weapons or as armor or as proof of something. Whether he can simply be what he is in a body that the world misreads and find that being what he is sufficient. The moments where this lesson comes closest to being learned are the moments where Brian stops performing his sophistication and starts actually using it. When he talks with Stewie in the bank vault and says something true about his own life, he is not performing. He is not demonstrating his literary credentials or his social analysis. He is simply being honest about his own pain, which is the most intelligent and least performative thing a person can do. Those moments are Brian closest to passing his test. Lois's lesson is the most domestic of the set, which makes it seem simpler than it is. She needs to learn whether genuine love that is not organized around status or image or the management of inconvenience, is something she is capable of. The Peter Schmidt world gave her a very specific understanding of love as performance. Love as the public demonstration of the right kind of affection for the right kind of person in the right kind of context. Love as something you show people, including yourself, rather than something you feel for them. Her purgatory requires her to love people who are categorically ineligible for the Peter Schmidt version of love. Peter is not the right kind of person. Meg is not convenient. The life she is living is not the right kind of context. And the question is whether, in the absence of all the scaffolding that the Peter Schmidt world provided for the performance of love, she can find the actual thing. Whether she can love Peter without the framing of a romantic choice that reflected well on her. Whether she can love Meg without Meg being the kind of daughter who is easy to love publicly. The most painful dimension of Lois's lesson is that she has what it takes. There are episodes where she demonstrates genuine love that is not organized around anything except the person she is directing it toward. There are moments where she looks at Peter and sees him, actually sees him, without the management software running. There are moments with Meg that suggest something real and warm and specific, rather than the managed affection of a mother doing her job. These moments are her closest approaches to the lesson, and then the management reasserts itself, and the lesson recedes, and she is back at the center of her purgatory, running the system that keeps the family where she has decided it needs to be. Meg's lesson is the most demanding and the most spiritually significant of the set, because what her purgatory is asking of her is not just difficult. It is the thing that was hardest for her in her real life, the thing that her real-life failure was specifically about. She is being asked to choose to stay in exactly the conditions that made leaving feel like the only option. She is being asked to insist on her own worth in a context that systematically denies it. She is being asked to do, day after day and episode after episode, the thing she could not do when it most mattered: to remain, to refuse the erasure, to say, clearly and consistently and without giving up, that she is here and she matters, and the fact that the people around her are behaving as though neither of those things is true does not change the truth of either of them. This is not a passive lesson. It is not learning to endure. Endurance without assertion is not what the purgatory is asking for. The purgatory is asking for assertion. It is asking for the specific combination of remaining and insisting, of staying in the situation and simultaneously refusing to be reduced by the situation that is the hardest possible response to the conditions she is in. Every time she stands up for herself and says what has been done to her and refuses the role, she is doing what the purgatory requires. Every time she retreats, she is falling back to the position that her real-life failure produced. The test is not whether she can stand up once. The test is whether she can stand up enough times, in enough different ways, with enough consistency, that standing up becomes who she is rather than what she occasionally manages. The secondary characters of the show, when viewed through the purgatory lens, each have their own assignments, though the show has developed these less thoroughly than it has developed the Griffins. Quagmire, whose real-life failures are in some respects the most obvious, is in the particular purgatory of someone who cannot stop doing the thing that put him there. His lesson would require him to develop genuine respect for the people around him, genuine recognition of others' humanity, genuine capacity to value someone else's experience and well-being as much as his own. The show has not consistently moved him toward this. If anything, the show has been more comfortable depicting Quagmire's behavior as a fixed character trait than as a condition to be grown through. If the purgatory is real, Quagmire is among its least progressed inhabitants. Joe Swanson, the police officer who keeps choosing personal loyalty over professional responsibility, is in the purgatory of someone who built their identity around integrity and then compromised it, repeatedly and consequentially, in ways that he has never fully confronted. His wheelchair, in the purgatory reading, is not a punishment for any specific act. It is the external embodiment of his internal limitation. The way that his professional identity, the one built on physical capability and moral courage, has been undermined by the choices he keeps making about where his loyalty actually lies. He cannot run. He cannot pursue. He is literally constrained in the role that is supposed to be about freedom and authority. His lesson is whether he can find a way to act with genuine integrity even within those constraints, or whether the constraints become the excuse for continued compromise. The show's treatment of Joe, which has moved from treating him as a figure of genuine respect to treating him primarily as someone whose disability is a source of comic material, mirrors the trajectory of his purgatorial stagnation. He has not progressed. The respect the early show gave him reflected the genuine moral seriousness with which the purgatory should regard someone who is actively working toward their lesson. The comedy at his expense reflects a soul that has been treading water. Herbert, the elderly man with his barely concealed orientation toward the neighborhood's children, is the most disturbing character the purgatory theory has to account for, because his existence as an integrated member of the community, without challenge or consequence, does not easily fit any therapeutic or educational framework. The theories that address Herbert tend to frame him as one of the most failed inhabitants of the purgatorial space, someone who has not only failed to progress toward his lesson, but who has become more deeply embedded in the failure over time. His purgatory, in this reading, is not one he is navigating toward completion. It is one he has settled into as a permanent residence, which raises the question of what purgatory does with souls that refuse the instruction it is providing. The honest answer the theory does not fully resolve is that some souls may simply stay. Not forever, the theological tradition insists, because purgatory by definition has an endpoint. But for very long periods, for what might look from the outside like permanence, the show has been running for 25 years. Herbert has been in the neighborhood for essentially all of that time, unchanged in the most fundamental ways. If his purgatory has a lesson, he has not yet approached it. And the neighborhood continues to absorb his presence and function around it, which is its own statement about the purgatory's patience with the souls that are slowest to move. Extended section: The Full History of Peter's Transformation, a Longitudinal Study. The clinical analysis of Peter Griffin's personality drift, introduced in Section 4, benefits from being traced more specifically across the show's seasons because the transformation is not monolithic. It happened in stages, and the stages correspond to specific changes in the show's circumstances, its writing staff, its relationship to its original creative vision, and the external pressures that shaped how the show was being made at different points in its history. In seasons 1 through 3, the pre-cancellation era, Peter's behavior is grounded in specific and consistent character logic. He is dumb, but his dumbness is the specific dumbness of someone who has never developed the habit of thinking carefully, not someone who lacks the capacity to do so entirely. When Peter does something harmful in these seasons, the harm is the product of his failure to think through consequences, not the product of indifference to them. The episode arc, the narrative structure that most early episodes follow, moves from the mistake to the recognition of the mistake to the attempt to address the damage produced by the mistake. This is not just a comedy formula, it is a moral framework. It says that causing harm matters, that recognizing harm matters, and that attempting to repair harm matters. Even when the repair attempt is clumsy and partly successful at best, the attempt itself is significant. The second season episode Brian in Love, in which Brian develops an uncontrollable physical response that both he and the Griffins initially believe signals romantic feelings for Lois, ends with Brian recognizing that the feelings he is actually experiencing are connected to his relationship with Peter rather than his feelings for Lois. Peter's response to this recognition is one of the most genuinely warm moments in the show's early run. He does not mock Brian. He does not use the revelation as an opportunity for humor at Brian's expense. He acknowledges the friendship and what it means in a way that is touching, precisely because it is so far from what his character's comedy persona would typically produce. It is Peter, in one of the show's first seasons, being fully himself in the best possible sense of that phrase. The revival era, seasons 4 and 5, begins the first phase of the transformation. The changes in this period are subtle enough that many viewers did not register them as changes rather than as natural variation in character across episodes. Peter's intelligence in this period begins to slide lower than the grounded stupidity of the early seasons. He starts doing things that are not just the result of failing to think through consequences, but of failing to access the kind of basic human reasoning that his early season self could access. He starts forgetting things he should know. He starts misunderstanding situations in ways that go beyond obliviousness into something that looks more like fundamental cognitive limitation. The character is being recalibrated downward, and the recalibration is moving him away from the grounded-in-character stupidity of the early seasons towards something more extreme and less humanly legible. The accountability structure also begins to weaken in this period. The episode arc that moved from harm to recognition to repair becomes less consistent. There are episodes in which Peter causes significant harm, and the repair sequence at the end is perfunctory or absent or replaced by a comic resolution that does not address the actual damage done. The moral framework that the first 3 seasons maintained becomes less reliable, which means that the character's behavior is being gradually decoupled from the ethical context that gave it meaning. Seasons 6 through 8 are the period in which the transformation becomes undeniable. This is when Peter's behavior toward the people around him shifts from harmful as byproduct to harmful as pattern. The specific behaviors that the clinical framework would flag, the reckless disregard for safety, the absence of remorse, the persistent irresponsibility, the deceptiveness, become more frequent and more severe. The episodes where Peter does something that in real life would constitute assault or abuse become more common. The laugh track maintains its reassurance that what is happening is comedy, but the content is increasingly not comedy in the sense that the early seasons use the word. The shift in Peter's treatment of Meg across this period is the clearest marker of the transformation. In the early seasons, Peter's relationship with Meg was characterized by the specific kind of inattentiveness that comes from having more immediately attention-demanding children in the household, combined with genuine affection that expressed itself imperfectly. He was not a present father. He was not particularly attuned to what Meg needed. But he was not hostile. He was not cruel in the deliberate way. There were moments where his care for her broke through the inattentiveness in ways that were genuinely moving. By season 8, Peter actively despises Meg. The episodes are explicit about this. He insults her physical appearance as a matter of routine. He finds her suffering entertaining. He participates enthusiastically in the household's collective project of making her miserable. And when Meg, in season 10, tells him clearly and accurately what he has done to her and what it has cost her, he laughs. That laugh is the diagnostic marker. It is the specific response that separates the character who makes mistakes and eventually feels bad about them from the character who makes the same mistakes and does not have access to the emotional state that feeling bad requires. Peter's laugh at Meg's speech is not a character note that the show is uncertain about. It is a deliberate choice that the writers made in full awareness of what it reveals about who Peter has become. They wanted to show you that Peter does not feel the weight of what Meg is saying. They showed you. And what they showed you, when you apply the clinical framework rather than the comedy one, is the absence of empathy that is the defining feature of the antisocial personality profile. Seasons 9 through 14 see the behavioral extremes pushed further. The graphic violence increases. The specific scenes that depict Peter inflicting serious physical harm on family members or strangers become more common and more detailed. The accountability structure essentially collapses. There are entire episode runs in which Peter causes serious harm in multiple episodes, and the only consequence is reset, with no recognition, no repair attempt, no moral acknowledgement that what happened mattered. The character has fully left the archetype of the lovable idiot and entered a territory that the comedy framework is not quite equipped to contain, but that the show keeps trying to frame as comedy anyway. The result of this full longitudinal view is a portrait of a character whose arc, if you track it without the comedy frame's insistence that it is all okay, is one of genuine moral deterioration. The Peter of Season 1 and the Peter of Season 14 are not the same person with the same values who is just expressing them differently. They are, in terms of their behavioral relationship to the people around them, fundamentally different persons. The early Peter organized his life around love that kept failing to manifest properly due to his limitations. The late Peter is organized around something else, something that has less to do with love and more to do with the specific combination of impulse and indifference that characterizes the clinical profile. His behavior increasingly matches. This trajectory, the longitudinal story of a character moving from lovable to dangerous, is the show's most disturbing achievement. Not because it was planned this way, though the evidence suggests some of it was deliberate, but because it happened in the cultural artifact of a television comedy watched by millions of people, slowly and with the full complicity of the laugh track that told those millions of people it was all okay, and most of those millions of people believe the laugh track over the content because the laugh track speaks more loudly and more confidently than any theory. Extended section. The Stewie problem. What the baby is protecting. The suppression theory, as laid out in Section 5, addresses what Stewie has done and how he has managed its erasure. What it does not fully address is the question of why. Why does Stewie maintain the Griffin household in its current configuration with such evident investment? Why does he go to the considerable effort of temporal management to keep the specific group of people in his immediate environment intact, rather than simply leaving, which his time machine would trivially allow him to do? The answer to this question is more emotionally complicated than the suppression theory's mechanics suggest, and it involves taking seriously a dimension of Stewie's character that the show's comedy often obscures, but that the most careful viewing of the character across the full run of the show reveals consistently. Stewie loves these people. Not performatively, not as a strategic investment in a particular social configuration, not as the calculated attachment of a being who has assessed the available options and determined that the Griffins are the most useful ones to maintain proximity to. He loves them in the specific, complicated, partially resentful, intensely genuine way that children love parents who are imperfect. He loves Peter because Peter is the first adult male in his environment who treated him as someone to be taken seriously on some level, however incoherently. He loves Chris in the specific way of younger siblings who maintain affection for older siblings despite the evidence. He tolerates Meg with something closer to genuine sympathy than his behavior toward her usually suggests. He loves Lois in the most complex and tortured way that the show explores, a way that contains genuine filial attachment, genuine resentment of the specific indignities of infancy, and the particular intensity that comes from being the person who knows, at some level, exactly what his mother is and what she would be without the baby who keeps her busy. And he loves Brian with a ferocity and completeness that is among the most emotionally genuine things in the show. The Brian-Stewie relationship is the show's most sustained and most emotionally developed relationship, the one that has produced the episode's critics most consistently identify as the show at its best. Stewie loves Brian the way people love the person who sees them most clearly and still chooses to stay. This love is the engine of the suppression. Stewie keeps the household together not because he has calculated that this configuration serves his strategic interests, but because leaving would mean losing these specific people. He could go anywhere with his time machine. He has been to dozens of alternate universes. He has stood in timelines where the Griffins do not exist and found that those timelines, however different and however interesting, do not contain what this one contains. He comes back because this is where Brian is. This is where his family is. This is where the specific, terrible, and wonderful combination of Peter's obliviousness and Lois's management and Meg's resilience and Chris's innocence exists, and he cannot give that up. The time machine is not just a plot device or an expression of his genius. It is his protection system for the thing he loves most, which is access to these specific people in this specific configuration. Every temporal intervention, every erasure of an outcome that would have changed the household irreversibly, is Stewie making the choice that Brian's life or Peter's continued presence or the family's continued existence is more important than the natural flow of consequences would suggest it should be. He is, in every intervention, choosing the family over what would happen to the family without his intervention. This makes the suppression theory something other than a horror story about a baby with a body count. It makes it a love story about a being of extraordinary capability who has found, in the most unlikely possible configuration, the thing that makes the capability worth having. He could reshape reality. He has the tools to reshape reality. He chooses, consistently and at considerable effort, to reshape it in ways that keep his family where he can find them. That is not the behavior of a villain. That is the behavior of someone who loves more fiercely than they know how to say. The gun that Brian keeps in the safety deposit box, read in this light, is something that Stewie probably knows about. The Bank Vault episode suggests that Brian has never told the family about the gun, that it is private and protected by the distance of a locked box in a financial institution. But Stewie is not most people. Stewie has access to information that most people do not have access to, through means that the show has established and that he uses to maintain his protective function. If Stewie knows about the gun, which the theory suggests he does, then the gun is both Brian's sovereignty claim and Stewie's ongoing concern. It is the evidence that the thing he is protecting most is also the most fragile. Brian is alive because Stewie went back in time and saved him. Brian keeps an exit option because the weight of his existence sometimes exceeds what he can easily carry. Stewie knows both of these things. The tension between them is the most quietly devastating element of the show's central relationship. Stewie keeps Brian alive not because Brian will always want to be alive, but because Stewie cannot let Brian go. And his capability is such that Brian's willingness is not the only variable in whether Brian continues to exist. This is extraordinary love, and it is extraordinary violation at the same time. It is the most human contradiction in the show, expressed through the most inhuman character. A baby who built a time machine has decided that his dog's life is worth preserving against the dog's own worst moments, and the baby is right, and the baby is also making a choice for someone else that might not be the choice that someone else would make. Extended section Cleveland's return, and what it tells us about the neighborhood. When Cleveland came back to Spooner Street at the start of Family Guy's 12th season, following the conclusion of The Cleveland Show, the episode that managed his return acknowledged the years of absence without making much of them. Cleveland moved back into his house. His new family, his wife Donna, and her children Roberta and Rallo, his son Cleveland Jr., moved in with him. The neighborhood accepted this with the comfortable familiarity that the neighborhood typically brings to significant changes. A new family configuration on Spooner Street. More people in the house across the street. The Griffins were glad to have Cleveland back. Things resumed. The theory about Cleveland's exile, covered in Section 7, focuses on why he left. The theory about his return is about something different. It is about what the return reveals, about what Spooner Street's unchangedness means for someone who chose to leave it and spent years somewhere else, and then came back to find everything exactly as he had left it. The specific nature of this return, the way the show handles it, is worth examining carefully. Cleveland comes back. The neighborhood is unchanged. Peter is unchanged. The bar is unchanged. The specific social configuration that Cleveland found intolerable enough to leave is present in exactly the form it was present in when he left, waiting for him with the patience of something that does not need to move because it knows that what leaves will eventually come back. This patience is the most disturbing feature of Spooner Street in the broader theory. The neighborhood does not adjust to the absence of anyone who leaves. It does not reorganize itself around the gap. It does not develop in response to the loss. It simply maintains. The Quagmires and the Swansons and the Griffins and the Herberts continue their patterns, continue their habits, continue the specific configurations of relationship and behavior that define the neighborhood's social texture, with or without Cleveland at the table. And when Cleveland comes back, he finds a place that has done nothing in the years of his absence except wait, not passively, in the way of a place that has been dormant, actively, in the way of a place that has been running its patterns continuously and will simply incorporate his return into those patterns without requiring him to explain where he went or what he was doing or what he learned while he was there. For Cleveland, this must be strange in ways that the show does not fully explore. He spent 4 seasons building something different. He developed relationships that had the character of genuine development, relationships that grew and changed and reached different places than where they started. He had the experience of his choices producing consequences that accumulated rather than resetting. He lived in a version of life where the things that happened to him left marks that carried forward into subsequent episodes. And then he came back to a place where none of that kind of accumulation is possible, where the week resets and the patterns resume and the social configuration is whatever it was the week before, regardless of what happened in the interim. The theory suggests that what Cleveland is doing now, back at the Drunken Clam with his old beer and his patient expression, is the most spiritually advanced thing any character in the show is doing. He left. He tried. He built something real. He came back when the building failed. And he sits at the table and he does not pretend that nothing happened, and he does not collapse into despair about having come back. He sits at the table and he is who he is, as fully as the neighborhood will permit, and he does the small, dignified things that decent people do in situations that do not reward decency. He maintains himself. He does not absorb the patterns of the environment that surrounds him. He brings himself to the table, the same self that left and that returned, and he holds onto that self against the pull of a place that tends to flatten everyone into whatever the flattest version of themselves might be. This is the most hopeful reading of any character in the show. It is also the reading that the theory finds most directly consistent with what purgatory is supposed to produce: a soul that can maintain itself, that can be who it is without being defined by the conditions it finds itself in. Cleveland is, in this reading, further along than anyone else at the table. He knows what the neighborhood is. He knows what it does. He is back inside it anyway, and he is not what it is. He is still himself. Extended section: the full case for the Grand Unified Theory. The Grand Unified Theory, sketched in Section 12, requires more support than a concluding section can fully provide. The claim that Family Guy depicts a place that is already over, that what we are watching is the residue of something rather than its ongoing unfolding, is a significant claim, and it deserves to be argued more thoroughly than the summary treatment allows. Start with the structural evidence. Family Guy has now aired, as of its most recent seasons, well over 450 episodes. In the overwhelming majority of entertainment products that run for this long, the length of the run produces visible change. Characters age, relationships reach new configurations. The world the show depicts develops in ways that reflect the passage of time. The families at the center of long-running dramas grow up. The social worlds of long-running comedies shift as their characters encounter new phases of life. The accumulated weight of time shows in something. Family Guy does not show the accumulated weight of time in any of the ways that entertainment products typically show it. The characters are in a permanent holding pattern. The house is in a permanent holding pattern. The neighborhood is in a permanent holding pattern. The social configurations are in a permanent holding pattern. The show has produced more than 25 years of television about a family that has not aged, has not changed in any sustained way, has not arrived at any different place than where it was in the first episode. The only visible change that has accumulated across the show's run is the degradation of certain characters, which itself has not produced lasting change in the relationships or the social world of the show, because the degradation exists as a state rather than as a trajectory towards something different. This is structurally unusual. It is not just the natural conservatism of comedy, which tends to reset situations to allow for recurring stories. It is thoroughgoing erasure of consequence at a level that goes beyond what the form typically requires. The Simpsons, which is the obvious comparison, also operates in episodic reset mode. But The Simpsons, viewed across its full run, shows a family and a community that have at least a partially coherent temporal relationship to each other. Characters that are introduced tend to persist. Relationships that are established tend to remain established, at least until the show chooses to change them. The world has a history that the show treats as real. Family Guy's world has a history that the show treats as optional, resetting when the history would require change and maintaining the reset's products without acknowledging the reset. The metaphysical evidence is the set of facts the show has established about its own universe. Time travel is real and has been used to change events that already happened. Alternate universes are real and accessible. Death is a person with relationships and preferences rather than an impersonal force. These are not just plot devices. They are the show's own statements about the nature of the reality it depicts. And taken together, they describe a universe in which the normal rules of consequence and finality do not fully apply, in which events can be changed after they occur, in which endings are not permanent, in which the mechanisms of resolution, the mechanisms that would allow situations to conclude and allow characters to move forward, are compromised by the specific character of the world those mechanisms operate in. A world in which time travel is casually available, in which the Grim Reaper makes personal exceptions, in which alternate universes offer endless possible versions of every event, is a world in which the natural pressure toward change and conclusion that produces narrative forward motion is fundamentally compromised. The situations do not resolve, because resolution requires consequence, and consequence requires a world in which events do not get edited after the fact. The characters do not change in lasting ways, because lasting change requires a framework of time in which change accumulates and is preserved. And the show keeps running, episode after episode, season after season, without arriving anywhere, because the specific character of the world it depicts is a world organized against a rival. The emotional evidence is the accumulated weight of the show's emotional honesty. The moments where the comedy frame drops and something real becomes briefly visible. These moments do not happen randomly. They happen to specific characters in specific situations that share a common feature. They are all moments in which a character is confronted with the full reality of their situation, rather than the managed version of it. Brian in the vault with the gun in the box. Meg in the hurricane house delivering her speech. Stewie watching Brian die in the driveway. These are moments in which the show stops managing its own content and allows the actual weight of what it has built to briefly press through. And then the moments end and the management resumes, and the weight is folded back into the comedy, and the show goes on. But the moments were there. They happened. They were real within the text. And they cannot be entirely undone by the management that comes after them, because the viewer who saw them has seen them, and the theories that account for them carry the weight of what was briefly visible. The grand unified theory says that these moments are the most important things in the show. Not the jokes, not the cutaways, not the famous moments that get clipped and shared and discussed as emblematic of the show's cultural presence. The moments where something real briefly appears. Because those moments are the evidence that whatever is holding Spooner Street in its suspended state, whatever is maintaining the eternal Tuesday afternoon of the Griffin household, is not perfectly airtight. The pressure inside builds enough, in specific episodes, with specific characters, to briefly crack the surface. And what leaks through those cracks is not comedy. It is the truth of what these specific people, in this specific situation, with this specific history, are actually carrying. The theory's final claim is that the show will continue to run, will continue to be produced and broadcast and watched, will continue to add episodes to its already enormous catalog, not because the creative energy that drives it is inexhaustible, but because the machine that produces it is. The business reasons for the show's continuation, the streaming rights, the merchandise revenue, the cost efficiency of animated production relative to live action, are real and sufficient. The show does not need to have something left to say in order to keep saying things. It needs only to continue generating the content that the machine requires. And within the show's own fiction, this becomes the most disturbing implication of the grand unified theory. The Griffins will keep cycling through their patterns because the structure that keeps them cycling is not subject to the kind of disruption that would end the cycle. Stewie's time machine keeps the timeline corrected. Death's partiality keeps the mortality mechanism suspended. The Purgatory's curriculum keeps the lessons available but does not impose a deadline for completing them. Brian's anomalous survival continues because the conditions that should have ended it have been altered. And the laugh track keeps running, and the show keeps going, and the house on Spooner Street stays lit, until something changes. Until something finally changes enough in one of these characters that the change cannot be reset. Until Meg stands up for herself in a way that the household cannot absorb back into its patterns. Until Stewie chooses something he cannot undo. Until Brian puts down the gun in the vault, not because someone talks him out of it, but because he has found something that makes the putting down his own choice rather than anyone else's. Until Peter, in some episode that may not yet have been written, stops laughing. The grand unified theory does not promise that this moment comes. It does not promise resolution. It only says that the conditions for resolution are present, that they have always been present, that the show has been building towards something even as it has been doing everything in its formal structure to prevent that something from arriving. The possibility is there. The characters have been moving toward it, however slowly and non-linearly, and if the show runs long enough, if it generates enough episodes in which the pressure inside briefly cracks the surface, eventually something might crack all the way through. What happens then? The theory cannot say. What happens when a soul finally passes its purgatorial test? When a dream finally ends? When a timeline finally stops being edited back to its previous state? Is something the show has not yet depicted. But the theories say it is possible. And the theories say that the show, underneath all of its comedy and all of its noise, has always been quietly building toward that possibility. The light is still on in the house on Spooner Street. Maybe tonight is the night something finally changes. Total script content end. Extended section, the anatomy of the reset button. There is a mechanical element to Family Guy's narrative structure that, once you notice it, becomes impossible to stop noticing. Every episode of Family Guy ends in roughly the same configuration it began. The emotional disturbances of the episode's central conflict, however large, have been metabolized. The relationships are in the same positions. The household is intact. The world outside the household is whatever the world outside the household was before the episode's events introduced disturbance into it. The reset is total and it is consistent, and it is one of the things most often cited by critics as evidence of creative laziness in the show's middle and later seasons. The standard defense of this practice is the defense that applies to episodic television generally. The reset is a formal requirement of a comedy that relies on recurring situations. If characters changed permanently in response to every episode's events, you would eventually run out of the specific situations that make the show what it is. The reset allows the show to keep returning to the same well, which is where the sustainable comedy of a long-running series comes from. The Simpsons does this. Seinfeld did this. Every show that survived long enough to become an institution has used the reset in one form or another. It is not laziness. It is the formal logic of the form. This defense is reasonable and not without merit, but it does not fully account for the specific character of Family Guy's reset, which goes further and operates more completely than the standard episodic reset of comparable shows. The Simpsons resets situations but not character. Homer Simpson, across his show's run, has had genuine if inconsistent development that leaves traces in who he is and how he relates to the people around him. He has learned things and kept learning them at least partially. He has had experiences that modified, however slightly, his relationship to Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie. The reset does not erase everything. It erases situation while preserving some trace of character development. Family Guy's reset erases both. The situations reset and the character development resets with them. The moment in which Peter hears Meg's speech and feels whatever might be the stirring of genuine recognition of what he has done is followed, episodes later, by Peter treating Meg in ways indistinguishable from how he treated her before the speech. The moment in which Brian, in the vault, reveals the full weight of his despair is followed by episodes in which Brian's behavior reflects none of that weight, in which he is operating from the shallow and defensive persona that the vault conversation peeled away to reveal what was underneath. The peel back and the revelation and the moment of genuine contact with something real in these characters do not carry forward. They occur within the episode, and then the episode ends, and they stop being part of the ongoing record of who these people are. This is different from The Simpsons reset. It is different from the Seinfeld reset. It is different from the reset logic of any comparable long-running comedy, because it does not preserve trace character development. It resets to zero, or very close to zero, every week. And the pattern of resetting to zero every week, maintained across hundreds of episodes and decades of production, adds up to something that requires explanation beyond the formal logic of episodic television. The formal logic accounts for resetting situations. It does not account for resetting character at the specific thoroughness with which Family Guy resets character. The theories provide several accounts of what produces this thoroughness. The purgatorial account says that the reset is structural, that the world the characters inhabit is designed to reset, that this is the nature of purgatorial time which moves without accumulating, cycling through the same configurations until the soul in question does the thing that allows it to move forward, and that the reset is therefore not a narrative choice, but a cosmological feature of the environment. The mental institution account says that the reset is the dreamer's dream logic, that dream time does not accumulate the way waking time does, that each episode is a dream within a dream, and that the dreamer resets the configuration each time a new episode dream begins, and that the thoroughness of the reset reflects the thoroughness with which Peter's unconscious mind requires the dream to maintain its specific shape. The temporal management account says that the reset is Stewie's maintenance work, that whenever an episode's consequences would have produced lasting change in the household's configuration, Stewie has gone back and edited those consequences out, and that what we see as episodic reset is actually the record of a continuous management project that Stewie has been running for the full length of the show. Each of these accounts is consistent with what the show depicts. None of them is mutually exclusive with the others. And together they suggest that the reset is not just a formal requirement, but a feature of the show's world, something that the world actively produces rather than something that happens to the world as a result of external narrative choices. The world resets because the world is the kind of world that resets. The characters live in a place where the normal accumulation of consequence does not apply, where the things that happen do not leave the marks they would leave in a world organized differently, where every week the configuration returns to its baseline and the patterns resume. This is the most disturbing implication of the reset, viewed through the lens of the grand unified theory. Not that the writers are lazy, though some of the resets in the later seasons do reflect creative exhaustion more than narrative strategy, but that the reset is the world's nature. That Spooner Street is a place where permanence is not available, where nothing that happens has the finality it would have in a world where things could end, where even death, as the show has established, is negotiable, where even the most profound revelations are subject to the week's end and the following week's beginning, in which everything is exactly as it was before the revelation occurred. If you live in a world where the reset is structural, what does that do to your relationship to your own experience? What does it mean to feel something, to recognize something, to learn something, in a world where feeling and recognizing and learning do not produce lasting change because the mechanism that would preserve lasting change, the accumulation of consequence across time, is not available to you? You feel what you feel. You understand what you understand. And then the week ends and the feeling and the understanding are gone, not suppressed by you, but erased by the environment you live in, and you start again at the baseline, as unchanged as you were before the feeling and the understanding occurred. This is the specific texture of purgatorial time, as the theological tradition understands it. Not punishment in the sense of deliberate suffering, not reward in the sense of genuine fulfillment. A holding pattern in which the soul has what it needs to reach understanding, and then has that understanding taken away before it can produce change, and is required to reach the same understanding again, and has it taken away again, in a cycle that continues until the reaching becomes something so fully integrated into who the soul is, that the taking away cannot undo it, until the understanding survives the reset and becomes part of the baseline, rather than an episode's exception to it. The Griffins are cycling through this process. They are reaching understandings and having them taken away and reaching them again in slightly different configurations. Meg's speech was an understanding. Brian's vault revelation was an understanding. Stewie's grief at Brian's death was an understanding. Peter's moments of genuine care for his family, Scattered through the early seasons and appearing rarely but still appearing in the later ones are understandings. The question the grand unified theory poses is whether these understandings are accumulating in some register that the reset does not touch, whether somewhere beneath the surface of the show's consistent return to baseline, there is a slow growth happening that is not visible in the moment-to-moment experience of watching episodes, but that is nonetheless occurring. The theory suggests that this is what is happening, that the Griffins are imperceptibly growing, that every time Meg reaches the same understanding, it is slightly more integrated than the last time, that every time Brian reaches the same despair and chooses not to act on it, the choice to not act becomes slightly more his own and slightly less dependent on external intervention, that every time Peter briefly sees what he has been doing to his family, the seeing penetrates slightly further than it did before. The reset takes away the surface expression of these changes. It does not take away their deep structural effect. On a long enough timeline, the purgatory ends. On a long enough timeline, something changes. On a long enough timeline, the light in the house on Spooner Street that has been on through every episode, through every reset, through every cycle of harm and recovery and harm again, will go out, not because something terrible happened, but because whatever was supposed to happen there finally happened, and the souls that were held there while it happened are free to go somewhere else. And the house is dark because it is finally empty, and what was never supposed to be permanent finally ended. That is the most hopeful version of the grand unified theory. It is the version where the show is not just documenting stasis, but documenting the slow, painful, non-linear process of spiritual growth happening inside a structure designed to facilitate that growth, and where the frustrating repetitions and the maddening resets and the character declines that feel like reversals are actually the specific texture of what it looks like from inside the process, the experience of growing in a direction that the experience itself cannot perceive. The show does not confirm this reading. The show does not deny it. The show keeps running, and the house stays lit, and somewhere in the cycle the Griffins are doing whatever it is they are slowly learning to do, however many episodes it takes, however many seasons, however many resets, they are doing it. Something is happening even when nothing seems to be happening. The most optimistic interpretation of Family Guy's most frustrating narrative feature is that the frustrating feature is not a bug. It is the point. Extended section quagmire, community complicity, and the space between what we know and what we do. The quagmire sections of this script have addressed the specific mechanisms by which the community around him maintains his position within it without formally confronting what his position costs. The social laughter that reframes harm as comedy. The selective authority of Joe, who enforces law against outsiders while treating Quagmire's pattern as outside the law's domain. The good deed economy that allows genuinely warm behavior in some registers to function as credit against genuinely harmful behavior in others. These mechanisms are real, and the show depicts them with an accuracy that is either deeply intentional or so naturalistic that it reads as intentional, even if it emerged from less deliberate creative choices. What this section wants to address is the specific experience of the people around Quagmire who understand what they know about him and continue to behave as though they do not. This is a psychological experience that real people have in real communities, and the show depicts it with enough accuracy to be worth examining in some detail. Consider Peter's relationship to what he knows about Quagmire. The show has depicted, across many seasons, Peter witnessing behaviors by Quagmire that any person paying attention would recognize as serious warning signals. He has seen Quagmire drug drinks. He has heard Quagmire discuss encounters with women in ways that, without the comedy frame's assistance, would be recognized as describing non-consensual contact. He has seen the aftermath of situations that Quagmire's behavior created. And he maintains the friendship. He goes to the bar, he sits at the table, he drinks his beer, and he laughs at whatever Quagmire says, because Quagmire is his friend, and the laugh track confirms that this is the appropriate response, and the episode will end with everything in its usual position. Peter is not stupid about Quagmire in the way he is stupid about most things. The show does not depict Peter as failing to register what Quagmire does, because Peter lacks the cognitive capacity to register it. It depicts Peter as choosing not to hold what he registers in a way that would require a response. This is a specific kind of knowing, a kind that is available in communities everywhere, the knowing that lives alongside the behavior and does not produce the disruption that acknowledging the knowing would produce. Peter knows what Quagmire is and chooses not to know what Quagmire is. Simultaneously, in the specific compartmentalized way that humans maintain when full knowing would require action they are not prepared to take. Joe's knowing is more complex and more disturbing because Joe's professional identity is constituted entirely by taking action on the basis of what he knows. He is a police officer. He has dedicated his life to the proposition that knowing something harmful and doing something about it are connected, that the knowledge of harm produces the obligation to respond to harm, that this connection is the foundational moral premise of the institution he represents. And he maintains a friendship with Quagmire. He sits at the same table. He participates in the same social configuration. He extends to Quagmire the specific exemption that communities extend to their members, the exemption that says knowing is not the same as official knowing, that what happens between friends at a bar table does not carry the same weight as what happens in an official capacity, that the rules he enforces in his professional role do not apply to the relationships of his personal life. This is not unique to Joe. This is the specific mechanism by which communities protect their members from the institutions that are supposed to protect the community from harm. The officer who knows what a neighbor does and does not file a report. The teacher who knows what a colleague says to students and does not contact administration. The friend who knows what another friend does to the people they date and does not say anything because saying something would require a confrontation that the friendship cannot survive. These are the everyday mechanisms of community complicity depicted with extraordinary accuracy in the relationship between Joe Swanson and Glenn Quagmire across 25 seasons of a cartoon about a dysfunctional family in a fictional Rhode Island neighborhood. The episode where Quagmire has a friend who is in an abusive relationship with a man, the episode titled Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, positions Quagmire as the hero of the story, the person who is willing to confront the dangerous boyfriend and ultimately take violent action to end the danger. This episode was controversial for a number of reasons, and the theories locate the specific source of the controversy precisely. The episode is not wrong in its depiction of the horror of the situation Brenda is in. It is not wrong in its depiction of how communities fail people in those situations by treating the known danger as something that requires a specific kind of evidence before action is permitted. It is not wrong in depicting Quagmire as genuinely loving toward his sister and genuinely enraged by what is being done to her. It is deeply uncomfortable in the specific way it positions Quagmire as the righteous actor in a story about gendered violence. Because the viewing audience has access to 20-odd seasons of context for who Quagmire is, and that context does not support the reading of Quagmire as a reliable figure for righteous action in situations involving women. The episode seems unaware of this context, or chooses to set it aside for the purposes of the story it is telling. The result is an episode that makes a real and serious point about a real and serious situation, while using a character whose history within the show's own canon makes him a problematic vehicle for that point. This is the show's complexity at its most discomfiting. The episode is not simple. It is not simply wrong, and it is not simply right. It is doing several things simultaneously, some of which are morally coherent and some of which are not, and the combination produces something that is more honest about the texture of communities and how they respond to harm than many shows that explicitly address these subjects could manage, precisely because it is not trying to be honest about these subjects. It is trying to tell a story about Quagmire's protective love for his sister. And in telling that story, it accidentally, or perhaps inevitably, reveals everything that the community structure around Quagmire protects and enables and looks away from. The episode is its own best critique. The hero of the episode is the person who most needs to be examined by the episode's moral framework, and the show does not seem to know this. And the fact that the show does not seem to know this is the most accurate possible depiction of how community complicity works in the real world. Communities don't know, or they know in the partial, compartmentalized way that Peter knows about Quagmire, in the way that allows the knowing to coexist with the friendship and the bar table and the weekly beer and the laugh track's assurance that this is all fine. This is all just the way things are. This is just Glenn being Glenn. Nothing here requires your attention or your action or your moral reckoning. The show is an accurate portrait of this, not because it intended to be, because the logic of the world it built followed its own consequences wherever they led, and some of those consequences are among the more honest things that American entertainment has managed to produce about how harm persists in communities that know about it and decide, collectively and consistently, to treat the knowing as something other than a call to action. Extended section, the show's most honest episode and what it proves. Family Guy has produced one episode that critics, theorists, and long-term fans consistently identify as categorically different from everything around it. An episode that seems to come from a different show, or from a version of this show that briefly stopped managing itself and allowed itself to be what it is most honestly. That episode is Brian and Stewie, which aired in the 8th season and consists entirely of Brian and Stewie locked in a bank vault overnight, talking. There are no cutaway gags in this episode. There is no joke that exists outside the situation and the characters. There is no laugh track moment where a random image appears to provide relief from the intensity of what is happening between these two characters. The episode is 22 minutes of two characters in a room, talking. It is among the best things the show has ever produced, and it is worth examining in some detail because what it proves about Family Guy is more important than anything that most of the show's other episodes prove. The episode proves that the characters have depth that the show typically does not use. Stewie, who in the surrounding episodes of this season is functioning primarily as a vehicle for broadly comic situations and the developing friendship storyline with Brian, reveals in this episode the specific texture of his intelligence and his emotional life and his understanding of his situation in ways that the comedy format cannot normally support. He knows things about himself in this episode that the comedy format would normally require him to not know or to know only in punchline form. He knows what Brian means to him. He knows what his life in the Griffin household is and what it provides and what it costs. He speaks about these things with an honesty that is not available to his character in most episodes, and that makes him, in this episode, feel more real than almost any animated character in the show's history. Brian reveals the gun. This is the episode's central revelation, and it is the revelation that the theoretical framework this script has built returns to repeatedly because it is the most honest single moment in the show's entire run. Brian Griffin keeps a handgun in a safety deposit box in a bank because there are times when his life exceeds what he can carry. He has thought about ending it. He has not done so. The box in the bank is his relationship to that option. Close enough to be real, far enough away to not be immediate. It is the specific spatial management of a person who has decided not to close the option while choosing not to exercise it, who needs the option to exist while needing it to require some effort to access. The reveal is handled with extraordinary care. The show does not use the laugh track to manage it. The moment is allowed to be what it is, which is devastating, which is the most honest portrait of Brian's interior life that the show ever produces, which is the evidence that underneath the pomposity and the pretension and the hypocritical political positioning that the later seasons use him for, there is a being in genuine pain whose relationship to his own continued existence is more complicated than the comedy frame ever allows us to see. Stewie's response to this revelation is equally important and equally handled with care. He does not laugh. He does not pivot to comedy. He responds with the specific gravity that the moment deserves, and in doing so, the show produces a version of Stewie that is not the evil genius of the early seasons and not the insecure emotional kid of the middle seasons, but something richer and more complex than either. A being who genuinely loves his friend and is genuinely troubled by the evidence of that friend's suffering, and who responds to that suffering not with the management strategies that characterize his behavior in most episodes, but with the specific helplessness and presence that love without solutions produces in people when they encounter the full weight of someone else's pain. This episode is the show's most honest statement about what its central relationship actually contains. The Brian-Stewie friendship in this episode is revealed to be something more sustaining and more costly than the comedy format typically allows it to be. Brian's well-being depends on it in ways that he does not have the full resources to acknowledge in most episodes. Stewie's understanding of Brian's interior life is more complete and more serious than the comedy format typically requires it to be. They are, in this episode, two beings in genuine relationship with each other, with all the weight and complexity and tenderness and difficulty that genuine relationship carries. And then the episode ends, and the next episode begins. And Brian is whatever Brian is in the next episode, which is not the Brian who showed Stewie the bank box, who allowed the full weight of his experience to be seen, who sat in the vault and let his actual self be present. The reset takes him back. The comedy format reasserts itself. The management resumes, but the episode happened. The Brian who showed Stewie the gun is real and is in the record and cannot be entirely undone by the Brian who resets to his usual self the following week. What the episode proves, for the theories, is that the show knows exactly what it has in these characters. The writers know who Brian is at his deepest level. They know what Stewie is capable of when the comedy format is set aside. They know that the relationship between these two characters carries real weight and real stakes and real emotional content. They chose to show this once in this episode with extraordinary skill and honesty. And then they went back to not showing it, for the episodes that followed and the seasons that followed, managing the characters back into their comedy format personas with the consistency and thoroughness of the reset. This choice, the choice to show the depth and then go back to not showing it, is the most damning evidence for the grand unified theory's claim that the show is actively suppressing something. The show is not incapable of this level of honesty. Brian and Stewie proves it is capable. The show chooses, in the vast majority of its episodes, not to deploy this capability. It manages the characters into less than they demonstrably are. It gives them the comedy format version of themselves rather than the version that appeared in the vault. And the theories ask why, and the answers the theories provide. The purgatorial structure, the dream logic, the temporal management, the business imperatives that reward predictable comedy over unpredictable honesty, are the best available accounts of a show that knows exactly what it is and chooses, consistently and deliberately, to be something other than that. If you've made it this far into the night, this far into these theories, this far into the strange and somehow genuinely moving question of what Family Guy is actually about underneath everything it pretends to be about, then you already know you're the right kind of person for this channel. The theories don't resolve the show. They don't make it better or worse than it is. What they do is make it mean more. Make the 25-year record of this particular dysfunctional family in this particular impossible neighborhood carry more weight than the comedy format suggests it should. That weight is real. The show put it there, whether it intended to or not. If this kind of long-form, slow-burning, theory-deep content is what you want more of, subscribe. Leave a comment telling me which of these theories landed hardest for you, or which one you think is completely wrong and why. I want to know what you think, genuinely, because the people who watch this kind of content this carefully tend to have thoughts worth hearing. Hit the like button if the theories earned it, and take care of yourself out there in whatever hour of whatever night this is finding you. The light is still on in the house on Spooner Street. It always is. Good night. Extended section Lois Griffin, and the cost of being the one who holds it together. There is a character type that long-running family comedies rely on so consistently that the character has become essentially invisible, someone so familiar in the structural role they occupy that viewers process them as furniture rather than as person. The type is the competent spouse of the incompetent husband, the adult in the room, the person whose stability makes the instability of everyone around them possible. In Family Guy, that character is Lois Griffin. And because she is so consistently positioned as the stable one, she is also consistently the character least examined by the show, the one whose interior life is most thoroughly subordinated to her structural function, the one whose theories are thinnest in the popular discourse. Because the theorizing tends to follow the characters who behave in ways that demand explanation, rather than the characters who behave in ways that make everything else explicable. But Lois is where the most interesting question lives, and the theories that do attend to her reveal something about the show's architecture that the more celebrated theories miss. The question is not what Lois is doing. The question is what it costs her to keep doing it, and whether the cost is visible anywhere in the show's record if you look carefully enough. Lois Pewterschmidt grew up wealthy. The show has established this consistently and with some specificity. The Pewterschmidt family is generationally wealthy. Her father Carter is the specific kind of powerful person whose power is so total it has become invisible to him. Her upbringing was materially comfortable in ways that produced a certain set of expectations about what her life would be. She chose Peter anyway. The show's position on this choice is largely that it was made for love, which is true and which is also not the complete story. Lois did not just choose Peter. She chose the life that choosing Peter produced, the house in the neighborhood that her family would have found beneath her, the financial constraints that her family background would not have predicted, the specific daily texture of managing a household whose management requirements exceed what any single person could reasonably be expected to meet. She meets those requirements. This is the most consistent thing about Lois across the show's full run. She meets the requirements. Whatever the episode produces in the way of crisis or chaos or harm, Lois manages it. She gets Peter home from wherever he has stranded himself. She handles the children's needs when Peter is not available to handle them or has made them worse by trying to handle them. She maintains the household's functioning through conditions that would have ended most households. She is, in the specific and important sense, the reason the Griffins are still a family. The theories notice that this function, the function of being the one who holds it together, has costs that the show obscures. The obscuring is structural. Lois's stability is required for the show's situations to remain functional, so the show cannot fully examine what producing that stability costs her, because examining that cost would risk disrupting the stability that the show requires. She cannot be allowed to collapse, or the show collapses with her. She cannot be allowed to leave, or the household ends. She cannot be allowed to fully register the weight of what she is carrying, because fully registering the weight would produce a response that the show's comedy cannot contain. So, the show gives her occasional episodes in which something from her interior life breaks through. An affair storyline, a period of personal crisis, a confrontation with Peter in which she says something true about what the marriage is costing her. And then the episode ends, and the reset occurs, and Lois is back in the kitchen, and Peter is back on the couch, and the cost is folded back into the structure that requires her to keep bearing it without examination. The purgatorial theory, applied to Lois, is specifically located in this structure. If Lois valued status and security, and the specific kind of comfort that her family background produced, and if purgatory's logic is to give a soul what it craved in a form that requires it to confront the limits of that craving, then Lois's purgatory is being the person responsible for the stability of a situation that can never be stable enough. She wanted control and security. Purgatory gives her a household that is permanently out of control, that requires her constant management precisely because the management can never be complete, that gives her the role of the person in charge, while systematically undermining the conditions that would make being in charge manageable. She has responsibility without sufficient power. She has the task without the resources to complete the task. She has chosen this, in some sense, and she continues choosing it, episode after episode, maintaining the household. Because the household requires maintaining, and because that is who she is, even as what she is costs more than the show is able to fully acknowledge. What Lois needs the purgatory to teach her, in this reading, is that stability is not the same as security, that holding things together is not the same as having something to hold on to, that the control she has spent her life trying to maintain is a response to a specific fear, the fear that without her management the whole thing falls apart, and that this fear, however functional it is as a motivating force, is not the same as love, that she can love the people in this household without organizing her entire existence around their management, that her value is not located in her function, that the person she is when the household does not need her to manage it, the person she almost never gets to be across 25 seasons of always being needed, is a person worth meeting. When she meets that person, when that lesson integrates deeply enough that the reset cannot erase it, Lois Griffin will be free. She will still be in the kitchen, probably. She will still be talking to Peter about whatever Peter has done. She will still be the adult in the room. But she will be there because she is choosing to be there, not because she cannot conceive of being anywhere else, not because the fear of what happens if she stops managing has organized her existence around the management. She will be there as herself, fully, for the first time. The show has not shown us this yet. It has shown us glimpses, the Lois who breaks through the management occasionally, the Lois whose humor and intelligence and genuine feeling for her family appears in moments when the structural role releases her long enough to be visible. Those glimpses are what the theory holds on to. The person underneath the management is there. The show put her there and occasionally lets her be seen. The purgatory is running its course, however slowly, and on some long timeline the cost of holding everything together will have taught Lois what it was always supposed to teach her. That she does not have to hold everything together, that the things that fall when she stops holding them were never hers to hold, and that the only thing that was ever truly hers, the only thing that was never going to fall no matter what she did or did not do, was herself. Extended section. The audience as participant in the laugh track's deception. One element of the theories that has not been fully addressed in this script is the role of the audience, which, in the broader theoretical framework, is not a passive recipient of the show's content, but an active participant in one of the mechanisms that makes the show's most disturbing elements possible. The laugh track is the key mechanism here, and the audience's relationship to the laugh track is where the theory becomes most uncomfortably self-reflective. When you watch Family Guy and you laugh at something you perhaps should not be laughing at, You are doing something specific and important. You are confirming the laugh track's interpretation of the moment. You are agreeing that what you just saw is comedy rather than harm, is a joke rather than a pattern, is a thing to laugh at rather than a thing to notice carefully and be troubled by. The laugh track offers you this interpretation and your laughter accepts it, and in accepting it, you become part of the mechanism by which the show's most disturbing content remains legible as entertainment. This is not a moralistic point about what people should or should not laugh at. Humor is complex, and the relationship between comedy and darkness is one of the most productive tensions in all of art. The point is subtler. The point is that the laugh track creates a specific social condition, the condition of a room full of people all laughing together, and that this social condition is one of the most powerful forces available for managing individual moral perception. When a room full of people laughs, it is very hard to be the person in the room who does not laugh, who sits in silence or discomfort while everyone around them is expressing enjoyment. The social pressure of collective laughter is enormous, and it is specifically directed at suppressing exactly the kind of careful individual moral attention that the theories require in order to notice what the show is doing. You are watching alone, probably. The laugh track creates the phantom community of the laughing room for you. It tells you what the room's response is and invites you to join it. And joining it is always the path of least resistance, the choice that allows you to remain comfortable, to remain entertained, to remain a participant in the shared social experience that television creates. Not joining it requires you to hold a different position than the one the show is offering you, to notice what the laughter is managing, to sit with the discomfort rather than let the laugh track resolve it. The theories are, in a sense, a record of what you find when you stop joining the laugh track and start noticing what it is managing. They are the product of the attention that the laugh track is designed to prevent. And the fact that they resonate, the fact that the theories about Meg's purgatory and Peter's decline and Brian's despair and Stewie's temporal management feel right to people who think about them carefully, is evidence that the laugh track is managing something real, that underneath the comedy there is a weight that the careful viewer can access if they are willing to stop letting the laugh track tell them how to feel about what they are seeing. You watched this, you stayed this long, you thought about it this carefully. That makes you the specific kind of viewer the theories need. Someone who does not let the laugh track be the final word on what Family Guy is, who is willing to sit with the discomfort, who understands that the most interesting things a show can do are sometimes the things it does not know it is doing, the things that emerge from the logic of a world the writers built and then set loose to follow its own consequences wherever those consequences lead. Spooner Street went somewhere the writers may not have intended. The theories follow it there. You followed the theories. The light is on. You know what it means. Good night.